Hello again, everybody. Very good morning to you. Yes, we're full crew here. That is Kendall standing by on the sports desk. Of course, Elvis is with us today. We've got a key important focus today for South Africa. Actually, we're looking at ratings agencies, Moody's, Fitch, and Standard & Poor. They are currently conducting their latest assessment of South Africa's ability to pay its debts to foreign lenders and to consider our credit rating status. Now, S&P and Fitch's rating are one notch above non-investment grade, which is BBB minus. Moody's rates South Africa at two notches above non-investment grade. So, our question of the day to you is, can we avoid a possible ratings downgrade on Friday? Now, Elvis, I know you're a bit of an expert on this. Just what's your feeling going into Friday?
You know, there's a number of things that the ratings agency normally look at, and economic stability is one of them. And of course, also, you know, instability, and when it comes to political instability, and that is what we found, and this is what the ratings agency is looking at. But there's also what the finance minister is mentioning, that there might be a 50-50 chance here. That we might not get a downgrade.
50-50, that's where we have.
That's where we stand right now,
50,
because it's 50-50. But others are mentioning, I've seen a number of reports from other analysts that saying that we cannot get a downgrade right now, because if they do downgrade us, that would suggest that the finance minister is not doing a good job and he'll have to go, and that might be even spelling disaster for South Africa. But that's where we have.
Well, that's what we'll be talking about today. We'll be looking at with a whole variety of role players. Of course, there's some big stories in the news also. We're looking forward to go to the Western Cape High Court also. The one guy who doesn't have a 50-50 right now is the prophet of doom, and that's the poll we've been running simply because it's such a big popular discussion point here in South Africa this week. Yesterday we asked, should we go to prison? We thought we'd soften the stance a little bit and ask them,
should the prophet of doom go to psychiatric or go for psychiatric evaluation? Do you think that that is maybe what should happen in order to maybe read his mind and find out what's going on? Well, 85% of you are saying yes, this prophet should go for an evaluation. Yeah, 15% are saying no.
Yeah, some of you are saying that we shouldn't go for a psychiatric evaluation, which is quite concerning, actually. But let's take a look at some of the tweets that you guys are sending in on this question, because it's a discussion point all around South Africa. I tell you, it's gone international. Lindiwe Nsimanga says, Newsroom, if possible, he must go for all evaluations.
This one from Afatse says, why isolate him from his congregation? Even his doomed congregation must be evaluated. Woo, that's a bit far-fetched there.
Peggy Sisamdunga says, Newsroom, he is not well upstairs. That's what Peggy Sisa saying. Now, of course, some of the best ones have come out. Well, one of the best ones that come out, the memes that's come out for me personally, is in Afrikaans. They say, that congregation has a doomini.
Yes, doomini
for the priest. So that's where we stand with regards to that at the morning. Of course, we're also counting down to the Western Cape High Court. It's expected to hear the DA's application to have Mr. Claudie Motsoeneng completely removed from the SABC. It should start shortly, but we'll count down to that. In the meantime, let's take a look at the headlines.
President Jacob Zuma is expected to make his last appearance of the year in Parliament for oral replies on a number of key socio-economic issues. The Basic Education Department will this morning brief Parliament on the Jobs for Cash report. We'll also keep you updated on that story as it unfolds. And as you just heard from Yeben there, the Western Cape High Court is expected to hear the DA's application to have the SABC Group Executive of Corporate Affairs, Claudie Motsoeneng, removed. Now, those are all your headlines. But before we get to the news, let's find out from Kendall Makamate if there's a 50-50 chance for FAF or not.
Very interesting that that 50-50 has already been set, and we already know that he's been fined his match.
It was 100%, not 50-50. All the money is gone.
100%, Elvis. They're not going to reduce that one. It's 100% of his match fee, I'll tell you that. But good morning to you. We also have other sports news on the go, especially in the footballing world.
Now, Noma, with the ball in, no, it's a beauty, match beautifully.
Cape Town City FC beat Maritzburg United 3-2 in a goal fest to go 1 point clear at the top of the Absa Premiership standings.
South Africa need to get themselves deep up into Cameroon territory. The referee blows the full-time whistle there.
Banyana get edged by host Cameroon in their AFCON group stage match, setting themselves up for another crunch game, that against Egypt on Friday. And the darlings of the soccer world, Leicester City, shake off their domestic blues to advance to the last 16 of the UEFA Champions League with a 2-1 victory over Bruges.
Long wait for Mahrez.
All this and more I've got for you later on the Sports Bulletin. Be sure to stick around for it. But for now, it is back to Elvis, who's got the news.
Thank you, Kendall. Top story this morning. President Jacob Zuma will come before Parliament today for oral replies on a number of key socio-economic issues. Now, his appearance at the National Assembly will be his last for the year. He will answer the MP's questions on government's plan to halt economic decline and funding for students at TVET colleges. He will also be grilled on the closure of bank accounts of the Gupta-owned Oak Bay Investments and the Public Protector's State of Capture report. The President's appearance in Parliament comes at a time when international ratings agencies are expected to announce a review of the country's sovereign credit rating status. Meanwhile, the Basic Education Department is expected to brief Parliament on the Jobs for Cash report this morning. Basic Education Minister Andrew Motshekga commissioned the probe after allegations that posts in the education sector were being sold. Both teachers, Union SATU, and the department's officials were found to be involved in the selling of posts for teachers. The report found that teachers' unions had a major influence on the allocation of posts in the department. It also found that in provinces where SATU does not have overall majority, the process of appointing teachers is above board. Now, remaining with the story, we are joined on the line by the spokesperson of the Department of Basic Education, Elijah Mhlanga, to give us a quick recap of the report and what we can look forward to when the department appears before Parliament this morning. A very good morning to you, Elijah, and welcome.
Good morning, and thank you very much for inviting me.
Please recap for us why the Basic Education Minister commissioned the probe.
Well, the Minister commissioned the investigation because there were many reports indicating that some jobs that some teachers secured had been secured illegally, and some people had paid monies to get those jobs. And the report persisted until such time that the minister felt it was important for her to put in place an investigation team which was set to probe the allegations and make recommendations to her. So the investigation has now been completed and the report is being delivered today in Parliament.
What can we expect to come out of the report, you think?
Well, the report will really show how it happened, who was involved, and some of the people that were implicated. But the most important part about this particular report today is the fact that we have now concluded the forensic part of the investigations, because the other part had been made public, but the forensic part of the investigation has not yet been concluded, and it has now been concluded, and the team has given the minister the report, and the minister will be sharing that report with the portfolio committee today.
How many officials are implicated?
Well, there's quite a few, there's quite a few, and there are those that are implicated without evidence, and there are those that are implicated with evidence. And the forensic report will show who has done that, but more important, it will take up to the point where prosecutions need to take place, because action needs to be taken, and the investigation team is clear about what needs to happen, particularly where there's evidence of wrongdoing and where people exchanged monies and other favors to secure the job. So all of that will be outlined in the minister's presentation today when the DBE team appears before the portfolio committee.
Now, those implicated, what sort of sanctions can we expect to come out of it?
Well, the forensic team have been gathering evidence which should stand in court. So we expect that people will be arrested and be brought before justice. So that's what we're expecting. So the Department of Justice had been working with us very closely to ensure that the cases that we have are strong enough that the prosecutors should find the evidence useful and that people should be brought to the courts to explain how it is that they ended up with a situation like the one that ended the department.
Now, it was also found that in provinces where SATU doesn't have an overall majority, it seems that the process of appointing teachers is above board there. What does that say about SATU as an organization?
Well, SATU as an organization has a huge influence in the sector because they've got the largest number of members and they are represented in almost all provinces, but they don't enjoy the same support everywhere. But where they have influence, you are bound to see certain patterns, and the report makes that very clear. But whether there is evidence of wrongdoing against such as an organization, that's another matter. But what the report has found, or what the investigation has found, is that there are people belonging to the unions who are involved in illegal activities, and there's evidence in some cases linking people to these illegal activities. That's why we feel that strong action in terms of the law needs to be taken.
Thank you so much for that. That was the spokesperson of the Department of Basic Education, Elijah Mhlanga, giving us the update in terms of the report and what's going to happen this afternoon. We'll find out. We'll keep you posted. Now, the Western Cape High Court is expected to hear the DA's application to have Hlaudi Motsoeneng removed from the SABC. Now, this is not the DA's first court application regarding Motsoeneng. In March, the DA lodged an application to have the outcome of the disciplinary inquiry into Motsoeneng, then as the Chief Operating Officer, set aside. The second part of the request deals with the DA's application to have the appointment of Motsoeneng as the Group Executive of Corporate Affairs declared invalid. The DA is asking the court to confirm that Motsoeneng should not hold any position at the SABC until and only if the Public Protector's report is set aside. The official opposition say this is based on numerous adverse judicial findings against his qualifications, as well as his conduct throughout his tenure at the SABC. Now, as soon as we have that connection, we'll link you to that case in terms of what is currently happening in front of the court with Hlaudi Motsoeneng. So stay tuned. Now, unemployment in the country is now at its highest level in 13 years. As more job seekers enters the market, Statistics South Africa says the jobless rate rose to 27.1% in the third quarter. Analysts say the remedy lies in attracting more investment through improving business confidence and developing skills.
Tony Pulo returns from a day of job scouting. The 35-year-old Diepkloof father has been out of work for 3 years and fixes the odd cell phone for cash.
Without money, it becomes difficult to go look for a job. That's why other people get discouraged, because you find out that maybe they are breadwinners, and then after being breadwinners, they lose their job, and then in their families, they get discredited.
Tony is part of the 5.9 million job seekers currently without work. Although the number of people employed across various sectors rose by 288,000 in the third quarter, the number of people looking for a job also rose. Economist Kevin Ling says the country needs to create more than 350,000 jobs a year just to keep the unemployment rate where it is, at 27.1%. Government can only do so much, he says. In fact, it shed 45,000 jobs between the quarters.
They can't add a huge number of jobs, otherwise we run the risk of losing our credit rating. So government has to go through this process of cleaning up in terms of employment and trying to make sure that where we do employ, they are the appropriate skills.
He says the chronically high jobless number can only be eased by nurturing skills through an effective education system.
I think we need urgently a skill audit in South Africa, find out what skills we've got. More importantly, what skills do we need, and can we match up training institutions to deliver more of those skills? So to me, there's a bigger effort that needs to be done.
If the unemployment rate includes the number of people who have given up looking for a job, it would be just above a staggering 36%. Tony Pulo says he doesn't want to be part of that statistics and insists he will persevere in his job search. Tony Pulo represents thousands of other young people in Diepkloof who say they'd rather not be on the streets. The eagerness, the enthusiasm and the desperation is there. But the key word for them is opportunity. If they have those opportunities, they say they would be employed. Devin Murrigan, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Scary numbers coming out of that statistic. Now, rescue workers have found a body that is believed to be that of a toddler who drowned 2 weeks ago in Alexandra. The child had been clinging onto her father when she slipped and fell into the Yekske River.
A body believed to be that of one of the flash flood victims, discovered by Solomon Makamu while he was putting up this fence next to the Yekske River. Makamu made the discovery during a break. When I arrived here, he says, I detected a foul smell, and as I walked further, I saw the feet of a toddler between the flood debris. But it's yet to be confirmed whether the body is that of the 3-year-old child.
Our police divers were in hard to BS them. We had to call them to come and see and identify and check if they can help us to remove the baby from the river. And indeed, they did that.
There will be an identification process.
If it need be, where there will be more people who will come forward. Yes, of course, the DNA will be done, where there will be verify who is the really family member of the child.
For the Chauke family, the discovery could lead to closure following weeks of uncertainty. Marigeta Mtlabe, SABC News, Butlu, north of Johannesburg.
Well, that's your news for now. Now, remember that we're focusing on the possible downgrade for South Africa. All the ratings agencies are currently here in South Africa and they're circling above. And we got to be on the lookout. We're asking you the question, can we avoid a possible ratings downgrade on Friday? Moody's, they are feeling very moody. On Friday, it might happen. Let's go over to Eben to find out.
Yeah, Elvis, 50-50 at best is what you say. Oh, that's what some of the experts are saying as well. The countdown has begun, though, to the first announcement by international credit ratings agencies regarding their latest position on the country's global credit rating. Moody's, Fitch and Standard & Poor's are currently conducting their assessment of the country's ability to pay its debts to foreign lenders. Moody's is expected to be the first to announce this decision on Friday.
International credit rating agencies appear to be holding South Africa's financial destiny in their hands. They've been in the country since last week, meeting various stakeholders, including Deputy President Cyril Ramaphosa.
We are informing rating agencies that we've made tremendous progress on the labor instability issue. We have made a lot of progress and have reached agreement on the key issues. For instance, on the issue of strike balloting, which was a major concern to many people who have been observing the labor relations landscape. The other one that we discussed is how are we going to engage the private sector? How are we going to bring in the private sector to invest, I say, alongside government? That is also another important reform process. So we gave that information to the rating agencies, and my take was that they seemed to be nodding their heads and basically saying this is progress. These are steps in the right direction.
The ratings agencies have also met business and labor to get their views about the goings-on in the economy and in politics. But Kosatu says it will not bother to meet with them. In fact, it says the rating agencies are being given more attention than they deserve.
We are not going to meet them. We have not met them because last time we engaged with them, we made it very clear that we are going to have a national minimum wage. They were opposed to the national minimum wage. They were opposed to most of the progressive resolutions and policies that we think are necessary to help poor South Africans. So we are not accountable to rating agencies. We hope that this government voted by the workers and the poor is also not going to fall into a trap of waking up every day trying to appease them instead of actually talking about transforming the economy for the betterment of the poor people.
Rates South Africa 2 notches above junk status. A downgrade by them, if at all, on Friday, might not necessarily spell disaster just yet. It's Standard & Poor's which is most worrying. It currently has the country 1 notch above junk status with a negative outlook. It will announce its decision next week. Fitch, which is the smaller of the 3 agencies, has the country 1 notch above junk with a positive outlook. However, it has not said when it will announce its decision. Mbongeni Muchwa, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Yes, it's looming rather large. And what's your expectation? Of course, we asked you the question. Please send us a tweet. What do you think about it at SABC Newsroom? Are we going to get a downgrade on Friday? Now, to talk a little bit more about this and the chances of it, from our Cape Town studios, we are joined by Brian Cantor. He's an economist at Investec. A very good morning to you, Brian. Thanks for being with us here on the Newsroom show.
My pleasure. Happy to be here.
I'm sure you watched the clip that we just had on TV with what COSATU came out. They said that they won't meet with them because they won't bother. It says the ratings agency is against progressive resolutions to help poor South Africans. What do you say about that dim view from COSATU then?
Yeah, I would disagree fundamentally with COSATU. COSATU pretends to be concerned about the poor. In fact, the poor of South Africa are mostly not working. They're among the unemployed or discouraged workers that you spoke about in your earlier clip. And a higher minimum wage of the kind that COSATU seems to think is appropriate would simply make it even more difficult for the poor to find work. And I think that is South Africa's greatest challenge, and the greatest impediment to growth is our failure to employ more people. And people learn on the job. I mean, we talk about skills acquisition, which is critical to incomes. You need a job to learn on the job. And if we could employ more people, we would be growing faster, and we would then be satisfying the rating agencies who worry most about our growth, our lack of growth.
Yeah. So, Brian, you talk about the numbers, and the numbers came out yesterday. That's the employment numbers, 27.1. It's gone up. What do you think? How do you think this will affect the decision of ratings agencies in the week to come?
Well, it certainly won't help, but we also had this week the acceptance of the idea of a national minimum wage to apply to all workers everywhere, of the order of 3,500 rand to be paid in a couple of years' time, or has to be paid. That won't be viewed, I think, positively, though. I think the news about collective bargaining and strike ballots, and I think also the news coming out of collective bargaining would be more encouraging. We do see trades unions now willing to sign long-term agreements with wage increases. So that portends well, because it means that the mines and the factories will stay open and able to take advantage of the weak rand over the next few years. That is a very positive development, I would say.
If we get downgraded on Friday, though, and then the same follows afterwards with the others, how do you think this will affect the consumer, especially going into festive season?
Well, it might push up interest rates at the longer end of the market. I don't think there's any direct impact on consumers, though there may be, well, a confidence effect, which is all important for consumers. One needs to have a sense the country's moving forward to want to spend more, and the weakness of our economy is really the weakness or the inability or the unwillingness of households to spend more, constrained in part by unemployment. But certainly for those in jobs, wages are rising faster than inflation, so spending power is there, but it's not being exercised. So more spending, more borrowing, lower interest rates would be very helpful to the growth prospects of the economy.
Let's talk about debt quickly, because that's one of the big talking points with regards to this. With our current growth rate, will we be able to service the debt, or at least make the agencies happy with regards to that outlook?
Yes, well, that issue was really dealt with by Minister Gordon in his midterm budget. He showed that he was in charge of our fiscal affairs, and that we would be able to contain our borrowing requirements. We would be collecting more revenue, and so I think that issue was dealt with, though it was conditional upon his authority as Minister of Finance. Had he been replaced, I think that issue would not have been resolved. So, but higher taxes in themselves, which are necessary, and tax rates, because the economy is so weak, you have to raise tax rates to collect more revenue. That's not helpful to growth. Just on the Moody's, fortunately, comes first. So and they are 2 notches, and they're more notches above when it comes to local rand-denominated debt. So it's very unlikely that Moody's would push us two rungs down the ladder and declare us not investment grade debt. And as long as one of the major rating agencies regard you as investment grade, that's good enough for those pension funds who are around the world, who are constrained by the grading that you get as a borrower.
In conclusion, Brian, what's your feeling then for Friday? It's positive, isn't it?
Yes, I would say we won't be downgraded this time round, though the issue will not go away, and that's the issue only goes away when we can demonstrate faster growth and therefore the ability to raise tax revenues to meet our commitments without economic strain, which is really the risk, that the economic strain becomes so great that you, as a country, you can't actually fund your debts without printing money, and that's the danger that the rating agencies are concerned with.
Brian, thank you very much for giving us your considered views here on the Newsroom show today. Thank you once again. That was Brian Cantor. He's an economist in Cape Town at Investec. He says he's got a good feeling, so you shouldn't worry too much. Of course, we ask you the question, are we going to get a downgrade on Friday? You can send us your tweet at SABC Newsroom. There's the question of the day on your screen. Can we avoid it? Well, the experts say they think so. Elvis says he's got a 50-50 feeling. I think that, well, I think we've done just enough to get by this time anyhow. Let's take a look now at what's on the social pages. As you know, lots happening. This picture's gone all around the world in the last 24 hours, and we'll start there again with the doom prophet. Yes, Limpopo Health MEC Poppy Ramatuba says the department will approach the courts for an order to perform a mental assessment on Prophet Letabo Rabalajo. However, the memes keep popping up on Twitter. Let's take a look at some of the really good ones now. There you can see, Spider-Man lying. Obviously tried the doom, didn't quite work. Welcome to church. You won't be needing this. A brain is pulled out of the head. Yeah, there've been plenty of memes doing that. This tweet comes from Tawanda. I'm Tawanda, who says brands are going to start paying pastors to use their products in church. On some, wash away sins with Omo. Going forward. Oh my word. What have we started here in South Africa? What have we done? Then, on a more serious note, the body of 3-year-old Everai Chauke, who was swept away by flash floods couple of weeks ago actually, is believed to have been found after 2 weeks. Yes, the family are expected to identify the body today in the hopes of gaining closure after what's been a very traumatic incident. Of course, unemployment figures were released yesterday, and there's been an increase once again indicating slow growth in the sector. Some people were pointing out some of their problems when applying for jobs. In this case, Mbonise says qualifications won't get you a job anymore. Andisele goes on and says, being denied a job because you can't speak a certain language? And Rosie says, there's nothing more heartbreaking than being denied a job because you don't have a job of your own. Interesting. 27.1%. That's the number where we stand on. Now, let's go to sports news. South Africans are uniting to show their support for skipper Faf du Plessis after allegations against him for ball tampering. Now, you saw the clip there. That's the Indian captain. Yes, Virat Kohli with a sweet in his mouth, giving a rub down to a ball that was in the English test. I wonder what will happen to the Indian captain. Nothing. Nothing, they say. Well, it didn't happen. 5 days. 5 days elapsed, therefore they can't charge him. There's also rumors of more pictures with David Warner. Yesterday, the world and Khosi Mampuru celebrated Oscar Pistorius' 30th birthday. Seems like a lot of women were thinking of him yesterday. Don't quite know what to make of that. Kerry's picture is captioned, "Happy 30th birthday, Oscar, thinking of you." Nothing. Then, US musician Mos Def was, well, finally allowed to leave, or was he asked to leave? Kicked out after he was detained for having a world passport. So Mos Def, Cape Town is no longer your home. Then the top international story, of course, has been the India train crash. Around 100 people were killed in a train derailment. That's in Kanpur in the northern parts of India. Now, on a lighter note, talk show host Ellen DeGeneres at The Ellen Show has received the Medal of Freedom Award by President Barack Obama. She tweeted, "What a wonderful day," with a snippet of her receiving the award. Here's a picture with her wearing her medal and celebrating with her wife. What a lovely medal. Very nice medal indeed. Of course, yesterday we asked you, where do we draw the line with religious freedom? Now, of course, today we're running a different poll about whether this pastor should go for an assessment. Now, the MEC in Limpopo is pushing to get this man evaluated. Let's have a look at what were the things that you said around religious freedom and the practice of religion. Vix the Nation says, Newsroom, if the congregation goes blind, they mustn't expect disability grants from the government. Yes. There we go. Richard Ramalisa says, leave a doomed prophet alone. Starred by those who claim to heal AIDS from Malawi prophet Busiri, dishing out money like dust. The Economist says, there are too many prophet pastors in our country. It's lawlessness, no justice. Government should protect citizens from these cruel prophets, I think, or pastors. That's maybe. Spaman Latlengwa says, as Africans, we have accepted a religion that will make us look like fools in the eyes of the world, but we neglect our ancestors. Hashtag doom prophet. Then Shiafa Nazula Showa says, Newsroom, I think there's no need to draw the line about religious because the people believe in different things. Yeah, I think I kind of understand that. People believe in different things. And it's your right to believe whatever you like to believe. And that's, as long as no one infringes on that right, that's where the problems come in. Now, let's take a look at our picture of the day. This one comes from Melinda Farrell. And of course, we thought we'll put this one up because tomorrow is the big day, big match under lights. First ever pink ball test for South Africa. South Africans standing shoulder to shoulder in defense of Faf du Plessis. Clearly upset by the allegations. Yes, what a wonderful, wonderful picture it was to see the South Africans showing a united front. Of course, since pictures have come out, David Warner licking a lolly, Virat Kohli licking a lolly and licking a ball. Sounds very bad. Anyhow, a comment of the day. This one comes from Emma, who says, Australian bowler likely to be fined after tampering with a ball using a mouthful of sour grapes. Thank you. Thank you, Emma, for pointing it out. Sour sweets is what I like. That's what Hashim called it. Sour sweets, sour grapes. They've never been good losers, the Aussies. Now, it seems like a very busy morning in the courts. Let's just take a quick run through what's happening. Some of the cases. In Limpopo, a 52-year-old man arrested in connection with a leak of matric Mathematics Paper 2 exam is today applying for bail in the Guyana Magistrates Court. Tinyiko Koza is facing charges of fraud, corruption and also theft. The paper was allegedly given to learners via WhatsApp. Then, in the Eastern Cape, the principal accused of sexually assaulting a 9-year-old pupil from a school in Dimbaza is expected to appear in court. She was arrested after she allegedly forced the pupil to parade naked in school after bullying another pupil after school. Then, in the Western Cape, the High Court is expected to hear the DA's applications to have Hlaudi Mutsueneng removed from the SABC. Coming back to base here in Johannesburg, 3 men who were involved in the Rivoli shootout, which left 3 people dead and 1 policeman in hospital. They were arrested in Johannesburg yesterday. They also expected at the Roodepoort Magistrates Court today. We'll keep you updated on that and other stories as they develop right here on the Newsroom show. Don't forget our question of the day, of course. There it is. Can we avoid a possible ratings downgrade? Also, we've got a poll. Tell us what you think with regards to the psychiatric evaluation of course, the doom profit of doom. We're going to take a short break. We'll talk more business, ratings business, after a short break.
It's more than a gift, it's capturing summer magic. Get a Galaxy S7 Edge with Tab 3 Lite bundle for $6.99 per month on My MTN Choice Flexi 200. Plus your choice of a Gear VR or an accessory kit. The Galaxy S7 Edge, now in blue coral.
We make sure to be where news is happening,
both locally and globally. For the latest business news, stay with us.
From South Africa to the world, we've got all your latest sporting news.
Don't miss our weather updates at every hour. Stay tuned to News Today, Monday to Friday, from 3 to 5:30 p.m. here on SABC News.
Now, we're staying with the ratings agency. Of course, there's a question as well that we posed to you today. We'd like to get your thoughts on whether you think we can avoid a ratings downgrade. But for more on the story in relation to the ratings agencies and the latest position on the country's global credit rating, we spoke to Economist and Managing Director at ETM Analytics, George Glinos. And we started off by asking if he thinks that South Africa will be able to pay its debt to foreign lenders with the current growth rate that we have.
So South Africa is not in a position where it can't pay back its debt. We're still very much in a position where we can. So South Africa's debt position is a fairly comfortable one at this point. I think the trouble here isn't whether or not we can pay back our debt. The trouble is that our fiscal position, in other words, our government finances are deteriorating. So it's more about the trend of debt than it is about the quantum, in other words, how much debt that we have at this particular point in time. So the fact that we are continuously deteriorating, in other words, our debt relative to the size of our economy continues to rise, is what I think people are concerned about. So the ratings agencies are not at all worried about whether South Africa is going to be defaulting anytime soon. It's more a case of how well is South Africa as a country managing its finances, and whether or not it's on a path of righteousness as opposed to a negative spiral.
International credit rating agencies will put South Africa's financial system under the radar to access its risks and opportunities. Are there still opportunities for investments?
Oh, undoubtedly. South Africa would abound with opportunity. I think we would have to have a look at some reforms and government reforms to assist in unlocking a lot of the potential that this country has. We need to look at our labor relations. We need to look at our industrial policy. We need to look at our trade policies, our mining policies. There's a very broad spectrum that we could look at to rejuvenate the South African economy. It's certainly within our abilities to do so. I think the biggest challenge at the moment is that we have a government which is fairly interventionist. It prefers to pull the strings. It wants to be in control over how this economy functions. It almost has an inherent distrust for the way that the private sector operates, and as a result of that, they tend to keep things very much, the levers of economic power, they keep very close to their hands, to their chest. So this is not a case of whether or not South Africa has opportunity. It has plenty of opportunity. We still are very much a commodity-driven economy, and there is plenty of opportunity on that front too. But we do need to deshackle this economy and the private sector from all that it has to contend with that makes business so much more difficult in this country than it otherwise need be. So if you're asking me whether there's opportunity, South Africa abounds with opportunity. It's just a matter of, in some cases, government needing to just step out of the way and allow that business to materialize as it will, to become a little bit more inclusive and to help with things like reducing unemployment.
My third question, Fitch is meeting with stakeholders, but COSATU has said that it will not bother to meet them. In fact, it feels that the ratings agencies are being given too much attention than they deserve. What do you think about this?
Well, I think that every country in the world has to deal with credit ratings agencies. I mean, you can ignore them if you like, but investors certainly don't ignore them. Investors pay very close attention to these ratings agencies because they do a very thorough audit and assessment of a particular economy. So in other words, if you're an investor and you would like to know whether investing in South Africa is a safe thing to do, and you know very little about the country, one of the first places you're going to go to is the credit rating to see how some very credible ratings agencies have rated the country, whether it's investment grade, sub-investment grade, what sort of risks look like, the general trajectory of risks and how they play out. So I don't share that view at all with the unions. It's exactly the view that I would expect from them, because they are more left-leaning, they are more socialist-minded. They are, in some cases, even all the way across to the communist parties. You would expect them to be reluctant to give the ratings agencies too much airtime, because the ratings agencies will want to promote things like the private sector, promote accountability, shrink government, all in all exactly the opposite of what some of these unions would like to see.
All right, Moody's currently rates South Africa 2 notches above junk status. A downgrade by them, if at all, on Friday might not necessarily spell disaster just yet, but how would a downgrade affect consumers?
So I don't know that, I think a lot is being made about what South Africa post a downgrade might look like, almost as though the economy is suddenly going to change colour and behave completely differently. I don't think that's going to be the case at all. As it stands right now, the financial markets have already been positioning themselves. Investors this information has been telegraphed to them for a number of months now, if not a couple of years. In fact, we've seen the general trajectory direction of the credit ratings. So it really wouldn't be a surprise if South Africa were to be downgraded to junk. I mean, we've been informed of the reasons why, and et cetera, and we can assess things for ourselves as well. Things aren't going particularly well economically speaking in South Africa. So it really wouldn't come as much of a surprise, and at least initially, I don't believe that there would be a tremendous impact. I think the second point to make is, ultimately, what does it mean to be downgraded? Well, the one thing you're going to do is you're going to swap one set of investors for another. So you'll swap one set of investors that has a mandate to only deal with investment-grade countries for a set of investors that are allowed to take greater risk. Does it mean that there could be some volatility in the financial markets? Yes, it does. But it's likely to be short-term. In fact, studies that we've conducted internally show that, in fact, post the credit ratings downgrade, some countries have experienced a more stable period immediately afterwards, because the news had already been priced into the markets. Investors had been anticipating it. So when it eventually happened, it almost it was almost as if it wasn't news at all. And I suspect the same thing is going to apply in South Africa's case.
That's a good news. We're asking you, of course, the question, can we avoid a possible ratings downgrade this Friday? You've been sending us, you've been tweeting us with regards to this. Let's have a look at what you guys are telling us right now. What are some of the live comments that you are sending in with regards to this? This one from Konanatso, who's a regular on the Newsroom show. It's avoidable if all government structures together, business, are working together, is in harmony to bring certainty and trust. Yes, that's the word, certainty. That's what investors like. The Reverend Derek Sharzy says, not at this juncture. Jobless figures are on the up, unaccounted expenditure on the high, debt burden high. From the good Reverend today. Unati comes, he says, simple man. Yes, we can do it. Credit rating, Fitch, Rand, SABC News, Newsroom, we can do it. Some positive words there from Onati. Yes, that's been our question today. Of course, a whole lot has been happening, within the sort of business space. We saw in the last 24 hours announcement on, of course, unemployment figures in South Africa. Those numbers are sitting a little bit higher than what we are comfortable with. 27.1, it's projected a little bit higher in some sectors. Of course, lots of people have been on social media with regards to the unemployment numbers. Let's just have a look at some of the conversation on unemployment numbers. Nomfundo says, I suspect those unemployment stats would look much worse if they showed them lokishi by lokishi, village by village, suburb by suburb. It doesn't quite work like that, my dear. Naledi, it says, these unemployment stats are super depressing. And then Palientle says, then again, there are learnerships granted to the youth. If you could look at the stats, it's only blacks that enroll. She talks about the unemployment numbers. Tiofi says, dear graduates, apply for every job after you graduate. Getting a job in your field takes time. Do that or add on to the unemployment stats in South Africa. Those are the numbers. Of course, we've been dealing with this for the last week here in South Africa, the prophet of doom. If you're watching anywhere in the world, it's a pastor that sprays people with doom in order to heal them of whatever affliction they may have. We've got 161 votes in on the poll. Should the prophet of doom go for a psychiatric evaluation? Of course, the MEC in Limpopo is saying that you'll be pushing for him to go for an evaluation. 84% of people say yes, let him get checked out. Because how can you spray doom on people and say they're getting healed, man? 84% of 161 voters are saying, take this man and have him looked at. Now, let us take a look at the front pages from around the world as it stands right now. We'll start down under in Australia now. The Daily Telegraph says the future of a Perth teenager allegedly caught in Bali with a white powder at a nightclub remains in the balance as the suspicious substance undergoes testing. Wow. Then in the United Kingdom, the Independent says Philip Hammond will use his first autumn statement in a bid to frame the Conservative Party as a friend to ordinary working class people, pledging to abolish controversial letting agent fees for generation rent and easing the pain of welfare cuts. Finally, we go to China, where the South China Morning Post reports that a powerful 7.4 magnitude earthquake hit northeastern Japan yesterday, triggering tsunamis along the coast, including a 1-meter wave that crashed ashore at the stricken Fukushima plant, that is the nuclear power plant. Now, of course, today we're dealing with possible downgrades. In December, Standard & Poor, the global ratings agency, is scheduled to announce its assessment on South Africa's credit rating, which is currently at the lowest investment grade level and has a negative outlook. Meanwhile, Moody's Investor Service will publish a review of its ratings this Friday, which is currently one notch higher than Standard & Poor's. Now, officials from Fitch, which has a stable outlook on its BBB rating, visited South Africa this week, and they're concerned about the nation's ability to stick to its fiscal targets and about the lack of economic growth. Now, Fitch has yet to set a date for its assessment. Now, via Skype, we are joined by Lesiba Motata. He's the Chief Economist at Investment Solutions. Good morning to you, Lesiba. Thank you very much for joining us. Can you hear me 100%?
I can hear you 100%, Evan. Good morning to you. How's it?
Yeah, it's very good here this morning. We're a little bit worried about what's going to be happening this week. What's your feeling with regards to the downgrade talk?
You know, Team South Africa has really done all that is required to make sure that rating agencies appreciate the effort that has gone into where we are here now. Yes, growth is a concern, but if you look at what has played out since the decision was made in June from all rating agencies, we have found that institutional strength has been demonstrated in the country. We equally found that the outcome that is in the domestic economy is not quite commensurate to that we have seen elsewhere in emerging market countries. We need to appreciate that the National Treasury, in the midst of political turmoil and issues domestically, were able to issue debt in global markets, and it was let up by investors because when they looked at the detail of our country, it really isn't a situation that is commensurate to where we need to be non-investment grade or the so-called junk.
Now, Lesiba, COSATU, they've come out in the last 24 hours. They say we're not interested in meeting these ratings agencies because they've got an agenda. What do you say to COSATU today?
Well, I appreciate that there'll be views to that end. When you have a country with a current account deficit, as we do, with a fiscal deficit as we do, so South Africa is small and open. We are very dependent on foreign flows. We are dependent on foreign trade. We really can't be isolationist in how we think about this. We do rating agencies to vet us in terms of where we're going. Notwithstanding, we've been having good reviews in the last few years. The deterioration is only now in the last two, but remember we've been seeing upward revisions on our ratings for some time, and that has been good for the country, be able to borrow money and also do policies of, increase investment that grows the economy. So the view about whether we need rating agencies or not is that we really cannot do without them. We need them.
Lesiba, thank you for joining us today. We've run out of time, my friend. I really wanted to sit with you in studio, but you're too posh now to come to studio, it seems, man.
No, you know how we do. We'll make a plan very soon. I'll be with you now, my good friend. We'll chat.
See you shortly. That's Lesiba Motata. He used to be a regular contributor with us here, but now he's the Chief Economist at Investment Solutions. So the mightier of the all. Of course, yeah, in South Africa, you saw there we got the pictures wrong when we talked about, we showed you the cricket pictures coming in. It's all around what's happening in Adelaide this week. It's the day-night test. It's the pink ball with the black seam. It's going to be the big one, is it? Are we going to give him 3-zip just because we kind of we're kind of morally obliged to give him a smack on behalf of the world?
Very well put. We're morally obliged to give him a smack on behalf of the world. You know what? We want to do that. In fact, it will be the very first time that Australia lose a 3-test home series.
Yeah.
And we want to be the first to do it.
Whitewash them. Them. This used to be the old pink ball, I tell you. The old pink ball with a green and white seam. But now they've changed it. It's now a black seam because apparently you can see it. You can see the black seam a little bit better in the dark.
Yeah, we can see it a little better in dusk, and that's where the real difference comes in.
Yeah.
I'll have you know that the match tomorrow in Adelaide starts at 2 p.m. local time.
That's
2 p.m. their side.
Their time, right? That's 4 a.m.
That's about 5:30. Yeah, 4 a.m. 5:30 our side.
Okay.
More like 5:30 our side. And it's going to be very interesting how it pans out once the sun sets, because that's when the floodlights come on, and that's when it is that the pink ball, that effect really comes into play. It's going to be very interesting.
There's a lot of talk around, of course, the wicket and the grass being left on. And last year when New Zealand played there, the game finished in 2.5 days because It was just too tough at night. You think this wicket will be a little bit flatter, I would think.
100%. They're actually looking at shaving 2 millimeters off the grass there. They've actually done a lot of work on the ball itself because there was a lot of feedback. As you've said already, there have been 2 tests played. First one was Australia, New Zealand, then Pakistan, West Indies, and now this third one. So they've had time to actually work on this ball and get it right.
So Australia are well under the pump here.
Yeah.
Australia, they have made 6 changes. The first time they've made so many changes since 1984, more than 30 years.
Oh yeah, it's been a while since they actually had to make these changes. They've been under the pump. And you know what's also interesting? This will be the 12th consecutive test that they play with a different starting 11. So yes, they've actually been under a period of reconstruction, but they're getting it so wrong. They're getting it so wrong. And for example, they've got 3 debutant batsmen that are going to be in that side tomorrow. And
against what Jason Gillespie called one of the best bowling attacks in the history of the game. He said one of the best bowling performances ever by a South African team. That's according to a legendary Australian bowler. So your feeling though?
My feeling on this one is we're probably going to bring in, let me see, Tilbray Shamsi. It's probably going to come.
Shamsi's going to play?
I think he's going to come.
I would love Shamsi to play.
He's a left-arm wrist spinner. He's going to be creating all sorts of havoc for the Australians. I think
mystery spinner.
100%. And I do believe we're looking at a 3-0 whitewash in Adelaide.
Thank you very much. Kendall Mahamati will be with us a little bit later to give you a complete update. Of course, the big story of the day for us here at the SABC and for you, of course, on the streets here in South Africa, that's proceedings in the Western Cape High Court. Will hear the DA's application to have Mr. Claudi Mutsuneng removed from the SABC. Now that is just getting underway there. We're going to go there live. Let's do so. Oh, they're not ready yet. The judge is slowly meandering into the court. Let's take a short commercial break. Hopefully when we come back, we'll be able to go straight in the court and listen to what they say.
We are one of the 22 high-burden countries, and out of that we're number 6, following countries like India, China, and with huge population.
Cough, night sweats, weight loss and fever, and cough being the most important of those. So, and especially if the cough lasts for more than 3 weeks, then you really have to worry and get tested for TB.
The motivation is to affect behavior change, particularly with people who cough and who may be carrying the bacterium. So encouraging people to use the elbow.
For more on health, join your host Dr. Selo Motaung every Saturday from 9 to 10 a.m.
It was bound to be an interesting debate with Donald and Hillary, him not even having bothered to prepare. So he was flying on instinct. And it didn't come across quite well. I'm starting a hashtag, medical fees must fall. There are many students who are protesting who are not necessarily violent. The students are saying the issue is how to implement, whereas the Commission's mandate is to look at feasibility.
Yeah. Among these countries, only South Africa allows same-sex marriages. Very concerning indeed, Prof.
Your sexual orientation does not demean your own humanity, doesn't make you less of a human being. That really is the essence.
Yeah, welcome back. Hello again. It's just gone 10 o'clock. I'm with Kendall Makamate. My name, of course, Evan Jansen. We are Newsroom. We'll be, well, with you until 12 o'clock today. And I can tell you we're counting down to the Western Cape High Court. We're actually waiting for matters to get underway. They can tell you that the DA is, well, they're launching an application to have Hlaudi Motsoeneng removed from the SABC completely. It'll be interesting. We'll go there live shortly. But let's carry on. We're asking you the question of the day, of course, there on our screen is, can we avoid a ratings downgrade? What's your feeling, Ken?
I think we can. We've done enough to actually convince them that we want to do it. And I think it's all about sentiment and where they think that our mindset is.
Yeah, well, I think so too. It looks like the experts are telling us as well. But we're running a poll on the story of the week here in South Africa. Of course, the prophet of doom. We all know who that prophet is now. We run the Mr. Prophet Rabalaho. We ask, should the prophet go for a psychiatric evaluation, as the MEC in Limpopo is asking us? We haven't updated this poll yet, unfortunately. We're still sitting with the old numbers. 84% of you are still saying, of the 161 that vote for that. We'll try and update that poll, and then we'll carry on a little bit later. Anyhow, now let's take a look at our top stories at this hour. President Jacob Zuma is expected to make his last appearance of the year in Parliament for oral replies on a number of key socio-economic issues. The Basic Education Department will this morning brief Parliament on the Jobs for Cash report. And the Western Cape High Court is expected to hear the DA's application to have the SABC Group of Executive of Corporate Affairs, Mr. Hlaudi Motsoeneng, removed. Those are your top stories right now. Let's go over to Kendall for a quick look at what's happening in the world of sport.
Even I'll tell you what, it's a massive soccer day. Quite a lot happened last night in terms of footballing action, and I'm sure you'll all be pleased to know that we're bringing it to you in our headlines. Good morning to you. This is what we've got for you in sports today.
Now, Ngoma with the ball. No, it's a beauty! Match beautifully!
Cape Town City FC beat Maritzburg United 3-2 in a goal fest to go 1 point clear at the top of the ABSA Premiership standings.
South Africa need to get themselves deep up into Cameroon territory. The referee blows the full-time whistle there.
Banyana get edged by hosts Cameroon in the AFCON group stage match, setting themselves up for another crunch game, that against Egypt on Friday. And the darlings of the soccer world, Leicester City, shake off the domestic blues to advance to the last 16 of the UEFA Champions League with a 2-1 victory over Bruges.
Long wait for Mahrez. 2-0 to Leicester City.
Now all this and more we've got for you in the sports bulletin about 10:40 or so. For now, it is back to you, Evan, who's got the news.
Yeah, thank you, Kendall. Very good morning to you. If you've just joined us, this is Newsroom, our top story at this very moment. President Jacob Zuma will come before Parliament today for oral replies on a number of key socio-economic issues. His appearance at the National Assembly will be the last for the year. He will answer MPs' questions on government's plan to halt economic decline and funding for students at TVET colleges. He will also be grilled on the closure of bank accounts of the Gupta-owned Oak Bay Investments and the Public Protector's State Capture Report. The President's appearance in Parliament comes at a time when international ratings agencies are expected to announce a review of the country's sovereign credit rating status. Moving on, the Basic Education Department is expected to brief Parliament on the Jobs for Cash report this morning. Basic Education Minister Angie Motshekga commissioned the probe after allegations that posts in the education sector were being sold. Both teachers union SATU and the department's officials were found to be involved in the selling of posts to teachers. The report found that teachers' unions had a major influence on the allocation of posts in the department. It also found that in provinces where SATU doesn't have an overall majority, the process of appointing teachers is all above board. Now, of course, the Western Cape High Court is expected to hear the DA's application to have Hlaudi Motsoeneng removed from the SABC at any minute from now. These are the live pictures. These are the live pictures coming in from the court tried right now. And we're waiting for that now. The DA lodged an application in March to have the outcome of the disciplinary inquiry into Motsoeneng, then the Chief Operating Officer, set aside. The second part of the request deals with the DA's application to have the appointment of Motsoeneng as Group Executive of Corporate Affairs declared invalid. The DA is asking the court to confirm that Motsoeneng should not hold any position at the SABC until and only if the Public Protector report is set aside. The official opposition say this is based on numerous adverse judicial findings against his qualifications as well as his conduct throughout his tenure at the SABC. They're not ready yet, so we'll continue with the news until we see the judge. Now, unemployment in the country is now at its highest in 13 years as more job seekers enter the market. Statistics South Africa say the jobless rate rose to 27.1% in the third quarter. Analysts say the remedy lies in attracting more investment through improving business confidence and developing skills.
Tony Pulo returns from a day of job scouting. The 35-year-old Deepkloof father has been out of work for 3 years and fixes the odd cell phone for cash.
Without money, it becomes difficult to go look for a job. That's why other people get discouraged, because you find out that maybe they are breadwinners, and then after being breadwinners, they lose their job, and then in their families they get discredited.
Tony is part of the 5.9 million job seekers currently without work. Although the number of people employed across various sectors rose by 288,000 in the third quarter, the number of people looking for a job also rose. Economist Kevin Ling says the country needs to create more than 350,000 jobs a year just to keep the unemployment rate where it is, at 27.1%. Government can only do so much, he says. In fact, it shed 45,000 jobs between the quarters.
They can't add a huge number of jobs, otherwise we run the risk of losing our credit rating. So government has to go through this process of cleaning up in terms of employment and trying to make sure that where we do employ, they are the appropriate skills.
He says the chronically high jobless number can only be eased by nurturing skills through an effective education system.
I think we need to do urgently a skill audit in South Africa, find out what skills we've got. More importantly, what skills do we need, and can we match up training institutions to deliver more of those skills? So to me, there's a bigger effort that needs to be done.
If the unemployment rate includes the number of people who have given up looking for a job, it would be just above a staggering 36%. Tony Pulo says he doesn't want to be part of that statistics and insists he will persevere in his job search. Tony Pulo represents thousands of other young people in Diepkloof who say they'd rather not be on the streets. The eagerness, the enthusiasm and the desperation is there. But the key word for them is opportunity. If they have those opportunities, they say they would be employed. Devin Murrigan, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Now, let's go back to the Western Cape High Court, where the DA, of course, is applying to have Hlaudi Motsoeneng removed from the SABC altogether. Judges Legrandsi is presiding over this matter. And Rogers, mind you, presiding over this matter.
It was emailed to all the parties yesterday. I believe it was in the afternoon of yesterday, which they could not have received due to coming to court. But we have at least had copies which will distribute to all the parties now.
Is that all? Well, in terms of the other amici, where are your papers? I see you looking around. Where are your papers?
My understanding is that the papers will be given to the other parties.
No, but was the paper served on the court?
Not yet.
Now, why are you here if you haven't served papers yet? And you want to be admitted as a friend of the school?
My lord, the papers are ready to be served. May I just sit in that?
But is this normal procedure where an amicus wants to be admitted as a friend of the school, hasn't filed any papers, hasn't filed papers to the court, and you want to be admitted as a friend of the court?
Are you to ask that these proceedings be adjourned?
May I ask for a 5 minutes indulgence? I don't know what happened to my attendees along the way from the territory.
But are you going to ask that the proceedings be adjourned if you be allowed in as an amicus, in order for you to present evidence which the other side can answer, or are you just wanting to make submissions?
I just want to make submissions.
Okay. Well, it appears that there are 3 groups that want to join us amicus to the court. We will first would like to hear the application and deal with that, subject to what the other parties have to say. Mr. Katz?
Yes. My Lord, the Democratic Alliance objects to all 3 parties trying to come in. And I use those words because we've only seen one formal application. But to the extent that there are 3 applications, the Democratic Alliance says that all 3 should be dismissed with an appropriate order as to costs. And perhaps to assist our learned friends, because the matters have been brought to this court defectively on 2 different grounds.
Should you not tell us that when you respond to the application?
I will do, indeed I would. But just to assist them, there was a judgment of the SCA in May, which I will beg leave to hand up the relevant passage. But just to set out why, so that they understand what they've got to deal with from our side. They haven't complied with Rule 16A and haven't even purported to comply with Rule 16 of the High Court rules and the dictate that have been followed in respect to that rule. So that's the DA's attitude.
Thank you. Anyone else that would like to add something from the other parties? No.
We abide.
Thank you.
We abide the interventions.
The same.
Good. Well, the Decolonization Foundation, Mr. MC, you first up. Let's hear your application.
Thank you, my Lord, I'm not going to take you through my heads. Take that the court has gone through the heads, but only to say that the decolonization is a NGO participating in the promotion of advocacy, human rights, and democracy. My Lord, I just want to go straight to the issue why we want to be admitted. I'm not going to go through everything.
Can I first ask what the implications will be if you are admitted? Because your application says that you wish to adduce evidence and you give as an example, but not necessarily all the evidence, an affidavit from a certain gentleman.
Yes.
Are you wanting to adduce more evidence?
We're not going to adduce more evidence. We're going to stand by the affidavits that we have filed. Maybe if admitted, then we shall be able to file submissions for argument at a later stage.
No, but if you're admitted, are you suggesting the case is going to be postponed for that purpose?
No, my Lord, I don't want to preempt what the court is going to do. I'm just saying if we are admitted, but this matter.
But do we have your? Do we have the submissions you wish to make if you are admitted, or do you still have to prepare them?
We do have submissions.
Yes, but do we have them? Have
No,
you?
the court does not have them. I have the written submissions in the event we are admitted. What is before the court is the heads of argument for the application.
But within that application, there was also an affidavit filed.
Yes.
And it appears that on paragraph 7, it highlights in terms of why the applicant feels he should be admitted as a friend to this court.
Yes, sir.
If you can turn to your application and the affidavit file, paragraph 7.1, and essentially paragraph 8. Yes, and paragraph 8 of the affidavit, it's essentially advanced two major grounds why it is of the view that it could assist the court.
Yes.
If I understand correctly.
That is correct. That is correct, Madam.
But what is the fundamental ground or requirement of a person that wants to be admitted as a friend of this court? What must he do?
The fundamental ground is that that person who wants to be admitted must be able to assist the court. And
In
to
what?
assist the court with any other information which may not have been before the court at the hearing.
Now,
in other words, to come in with additional information.
Now, it appears on the affidavit that was filed by the applicant in paragraph 7.1 and paragraph 8, it advances these two grounds on which it asserts that it will be new evidence that will bring to this court. Am I correct?
That is correct. That's correct, Madam.
Now, if you turn to page 778 and 779 of the record, it appears on the very same two grounds which the applicant averts it will bring new information. Mr. Motsoeneng has already advanced those grounds.
Mr. Motsoeneng has already advanced those grounds, but those...
So has the SABC in support of Motsoeneng. Mr. Guma has also made an affidavit in which the good things that Mr. Motsoeneng has done have been set out. So promotion of local content, champion of transformation, those matters aren't an issue in this case, but to the extent that they are, they have been said.
Yes,
that he was a champion of transformation, that he assisted the indigenous people, the marginalized. Those are all before us.
Yes, my lord, they have been mentioned by the other parties.
No, they were not only being mentioned, they were traversed extensively in these papers.
Indeed so, but
So what is new that you are bringing to this court as a friend?
But the applicant cannot or would not avoid dealing with them as well, because they go to the core of the interest groups which we are here for. The fact that there's some light that can be seen in what Mr. Motsoeneng has done. We took this part, my lord, because the DA's application says totally that this is a man who is in the darkness. This is a man who is, if I may use the word, rotten. Now, the interested group, as we represent them, wants to say to the court, he is not as bad as you allege. This is what we know of him. Even if these matters have been canvassed.
But Mr. Mse, as my learned colleagues have said, we have this information on record. We have this information not only from Mr. Motsoeneng, but from the SABC. And what is it further that they would like to tell this court, if admitted as a friend? Because we have this, and
my lord, what further the court could listen to from the
that the
applicant
Colonization Foundation might be interested in the matter and might see Mr. Motsoeneng as a champion of transformation, that's one thing, but it's totally different to admit it as a friend of the court in terms of the requirements.
My lord, Mr. Motsoeneng in his answer, as well as the other parties, they mentioned the good that he has done. We're going further than that. We're providing the court with people who are going to say this is actually what happened.
Sorry,
via
but
those
now this is
affidavits
what I
that-
asked you at the beginning. You say people who are going to say. At the moment, we have the affidavit of one person who says that Mr. Motsoeneng is a messiah for local musicians or whatever. But you said you're not going to provide any more evidence.
We're not going to.
Yes, so you're not going to provide us with lots of people who share Mr. Manye's view or the deponent to one affidavit. Now, you could go around the country and find any number of people who have this view of Mr. Motsoeneng or that view of Mr. Motsoeneng. How is it going to help the court to decide the issues in this case?
My Lord, this will help the court in the sense that, as I've already indicated, Mr. Motsoeneng has mentioned, or some other people have mentioned the good, but we say we file affidavits from those people, which then has not been done by any other party.
Not from those people. From the single gentleman who says he founded the Decolonization Foundation and one deponent. That's hardly a cornucopia of evidence.
Yes, my Lord, but the founding affidavit is very extensive. It deals further with what Mr. Motsoeneng has done. Now, this is the person we are bringing forward. Number two, the affidavit of Mzwakhe Mbuli goes also further than that. What is contained in Mzwakhe Mbuli's affidavit is not contained in any of the parties' answering affidavit or whatever document they filed.
Did you add regard to the papers?
I did.
I've just indicated to you on page 778 to 779, paragraph 18 to 21 of that. More importantly, page 922 of the record.
Page 110?
922.
Is the court could just
It appears a carbon copy of what Mr. Manye said in his affidavit. It's there, and it's even amplified in the papers.
I'm sorry, my Lord, for wasting
No,
the time.
take your
I'm
time.
still trying to get a
Take your
document.
time.
May I just be given the answer?
778 to 779, paragraphs 18 to 21.
I've seen that, my Lord.
Did you see that?
I have seen that, my Lord. And what is contained herein is also the ground we are trying to
Yes.
say. Yes.
Now, what's there further that you would like to add?
My Lord, further to put to the court is that let the applicant be given an opportunity.
But how is it going to assist the court on deciding the issues? Because, I mean, it's here, it's in glowing terms as to how they describe Mr. Motsoeneng. Champion of transformation, and are these really the issues?
But, my Lord, I have indicated that the affidavits that were filed say more than what is said herein.
You mean the one affidavit?
The one affidavit by Mzwakhe Mbuli, as well as the founding affidavit of Mr. Manye. What they are saying there, if one looks at that, is not what is contained in any of the documents. So I'm saying the area which has not been covered becomes our duty to come and cover before the court. That's the point I'm making.
Have you got anything else to say, Mr. MC?
No, my Lord, unless the Lordship would like to hear on any other thing. But however, that is the case that I am putting before the court.
Okay.
We're not saying that to be organically. We're just going to carry on with the case. We can't delay such a big hearing for lots of people who haven't tirelessly served.
Yeah, no, but Counsel for the Musicians Association of South Africa.
The Musicians Association of South Africa, the basis along which my learned colleague has been submitting to your lordship, essentially the basis which the musicians actually moves on the premise. The interest shown here is basically we're going further. The lordship could look at the submissions we're making on paragraph 5, which is basically, and from the assertion that the lordship has made on the issues which were covered in the affidavits. However, we are saying there's further to that. We say now what is happening out there, in as far as the musicians association is concerned, they are now organized a whole lot of protests to indicate now the support that they are showing to the respondents, although it's actually not on submitting to a lordship to say we actually support, but to assist the court to say there is further.
But how's the protest of the musicians going to help the court determining the issues?
Actually, what does musicians...
They're entitled to protest if they would like to protest. It's got nothing to do with this court.
The basis, my lord, is the same basis that we're moving with the first, with my colleagues' submissions. There isn't any further more that I can make submissions on this.
It's common cause in this case that Mr. Motsoeneng is no longer the chief operating officer and has no role to play in the content of radio. So if there's a local content requirement or policy within the SABC, it's no longer one which Mr. Motsoeneng drives, because that's not his function. The position that's of his that is now an issue is a corporate affairs function which, according to him and the SABC, doesn't involve any involvement in radio content. So why does local content, why is it at all germane to this application? If the SABC's current people in charge of operations think it's a good idea, they'll carry on with it. If they don't, they won't. But it's got nothing to do with Motsoeneng now.
My lord, I understand your lordship where it gets to the point that now if the decisions at a later stage come, but now the problem that we're faced with as the musicians is what, in as far as the local content is concerned and the support that they are at this stage giving.
Yes, but Mr. Motsoeneng has nothing to do with local content now. He occupies a different executive position at the SABC, which is not concerned with the content of radio.
But my lord, is still within the establishment, although I'm not aware...
Are you suggesting, as a friend of the court, you will admit that he is still driving
I'm not sure
those issues behind the scene?
I'm not sure about that one, if he's what involvement and the responsibility.
Is that the new matter you would like to bring to this court's attention, that he's driving it behind the scene?
Not at all.
Still the president. So what...
I'm not sure what his responsibilities at this stage are, but...
They set out in the papers.
Well, then that's the end of it. If you don't know, then why are you as a friend?
My lord, I will just stick to my... If my friends admitted, then we can be... If it's not...
So if your friend is admitted, then it's fine. If your friends don't get admitted, you're also okay with that?
No. My lord, I cannot take it any further.
You can't take it any further. There's no application before us, so I assume that you've got nothing further to add. Well, let me save you from your difficult positions. Let me save you from your difficult position, because there's nothing before us, we're not going to hear you.
May I request that my application be stood down 20 times?
No, this matter is far too important. More importantly, there's a host of counsel here that's prepared for the matter, and you are not ready, and the court is not going to entertain that.
My lord, we are ready. My attorney, I was with my attorney in the hotel this morning. I don't know what happened to him.
The question of being ready is not whether you know everything that you want to say. The question is whether we know it and whether your colleagues know it. And there's nothing before any of us yet.
The papers have been sent to the other respondents. It's only the court that does not have the report.
There's nothing before us, therefore we're not going to entertain your application. Mr. Katz?
Well, there's simply no basis at all for the admission of any of the three parties, and we'd ask that all three applications, such as they are, be dismissed with cost. There's no compliance with...
Why should we dismiss it with cost? Because, I mean, what cost has been really...
That's not for me to decide, my lord. It's for the taxi master to decide. But we've been here for half an hour. I've had to read overnight whether it's be 5 rand or 20 rand. It's a principle that where you have an abuse like this is clearly abuse. It's not a genuine attempt. My learned friend hasn't read the papers. They make no attempt, if there was an attempt at least, to comply with Rule 16A, perhaps. Not even an attempt. We have no attempt, just wasting everybody's time. Look at that. How much is this costing the taxpayer? And we're going to argue why the taxpayer in the main cases shouldn't be lumped with these costs anyway. So we would argue that these applications be dismissed with cost, as it pleases the court.
The application by the amici to be admitted as friends of this court is refused. Our reasons will follow, including the issue of cost.
As it pleases the court.
From a practical point of view, do the amici want to make space for others?
Yes, my learned friend asked whether...
May I be excused, my lord? I'll speak for myself. May I be excused?
You're always welcome next time, Mr. MC.
Thank you.
Excused.
Thanks. Cheers. My lord, we have 2 applications before the court. I'm going to call the one application, that's 3104, the disciplinary proceedings application, and the other application we'll refer to as the main application. Now, although they haven't been consolidated...
Just before you start off, can we just get our papers in order here, please? Just give us a minute or two.
Yes, please.
Yes, you may proceed, Mr. Kurtz.
My lord, there are 2 cases. The one case is case the number 3104 of 16. That was the case in respect of which the Democratic Alliance launched proceedings in February this year for hearing in May this year. In and during May, an application was brought to stay those proceedings by the by the SABC. And Samela J dismissed that, and now we are here before this court in respect of that application. We are at the same time not consolidated, also here for another case, which is what I'm going to call the main case, which is 18107 of 16, which is effectively to have Mr. Motsoneng not operated the SABC pending certain other activities. Now, what I intend to do is, despite the fact that they're not consolidated, we accept that the cases are intertwined, at least as far as remedy is concerned. So what I intend to do, on the assumption that the court has read papers and read the heads of argument, take your lordship just through a couple of the factual issues that we would like to highlight in respect of the disciplinary proceedings, without going into the remedy in respect of that case, turn to the remedial provisions of that we seek in the other main case, and then try and link the 2 together. I don't intend to in any detail deal with the main case's facts, other than to trawl through our learned friends for Mr. Motsoneng and the SABC's heads of argument on that case. It's now turn to proceedings and the file in respect of that case, and spend a little bit of time taking your lordships through that case. Why we do it is this. It seems to us that there is a concession, an acceptance by all concerned that the disciplinary proceedings were a nullity. They were invalid for various reasons. However, the difficulty that...
I don't think Mr. Motsoneng accepts that, does he?
Well, he doesn't... Well, I'll come to that, if I may. He abides the decision as we understand it that was in the affidavit that he filed before the stay application. But what Mr. Aguma does, he says in his affidavit, the court will find at 585, he spends some time explaining why it is that the SABC acted in good faith in the way they dealt with that application. What he does not do is two things. One, he does not explain how it came about that Mr. Macquarie and then later on Mr. Edeling were appointed chairman respectively, or how the particular pro forma prosecutors, the initiators, were appointed. And I want to come to that. And I want to flag that as item number one. Who appointed the chairperson and the initiator of Mr. Motsoeneng's disciplinary inquiry? The second thing that I want to highlight in respect of this notion of a bona fide attempt at compliance with the Public Protector, Skipper's judgment and the SCA's judgment is the non-dealing with Ms. Swanepoel's affidavits and why she wasn't called at those proceedings. There's absolute silence in that respect. And we want to suggest, and we do suggest, that the only conclusion the court can come to is that the disciplinary proceedings were not done bona fide, they were done with a mala fide purpose, they were done as a sham, a charade, they were farcical, and that's what this court needs to find for purposes of the remedy. I know that the court doesn't necessarily, in all circumstances, need to go into all the grounds of a challenge, but we would submit in this case, for purposes of remedy, at least, and in respect of possible appeals.
But is it essential to make that finding in terms of coming to a remedy?
Yes, I'm going to come to that. There's a case in this division. We prepared a small bundle, not very small, and there's one particular case, if you could hand up the small bundle. There's one particular case in this respect that I'd like the court to have regard to. That's a judgment in respect of, Andre, give the bundle, give it to them. It's a judgment in which the constitutional judgment of S versus Jordan was referred to for the proposition that where a court sets aside conduct, in that case it was, yes, you can't wake up, man, wake up, man.
This bundle is also not paginated.
It's short, it's very short. They're high principles. The proposition is this. In S versus Jordan, the High Court struck down a provision of loosely called the Sexual Offences Act. It had to go on confirmation to the Constitutional Court. When it got to the Constitutional Court wasn't happy or wasn't satisfied that the particular basis upon which the legislation was struck down ought to have been confirmed. But then it was faced with the difficulty that the other grounds of attack weren't dealt with, and they were then seized with as a court of first and last instance in respect of the other grounds. In this court, Swain J, and Your Lordship Rogers acted for the applicant in that case, but the court found that despite in that case it was the setting aside of conduct, the principles that I've articulated in Jordan, that the Constitutional Court articulated in Jordan, shouldn't apply for similar reasons to those in Jordan. For example, if the case went on appeal. So though it wasn't necessary, as Your Lordship presiding puts to me, to deal with all the grounds of attack, this court dealt it prudent and appropriate that it be dealt with in case there was a further appeal.
One will probably find as many cases where higher courts reprimand lower judges for deciding things that they didn't have to decide. I think the Jordan principle applies where one is concerned with relief claimed. You must decide enough to determine whether a particular relief should be granted. But once you've decided that a particular prayer should be granted, you don't have to decide each of 6 or 7 grounds that might be advanced in support of it. You could do so, but and I know it was done in the Erasmus Commission case, but
I think yes,
I'd hesitate to say it's
a case. The court decides on a case-by-case basis, but we're going to be asking for a special order of costs, as the court knows. And in coming to the decision and exercising the court's discretion in respect of that issue at least, the court needs to make a finding as to whether or not what happened was bona fide or not. And if the court comes to the conclusion that it was mala fide, why should the taxpayer pay for a charade? And that's the question that we're going to come to at the end of my argument when it comes to remedy. But just on this question of whether it was bona fide or not, I do wish to spend 10 minutes just explaining to the court why we submit that it was a sham, it was a charade, it was a violation of the Constitution, the SCA's judgment, Skipper's J's judgment, and the Public Protector's remedial action. Let me just turn to two aspects. I only turn to two. There are many, but two in particular. On page 585, Mr. Aguma explains why it is that it was a bona fide attempt at compliance. And he says on page 587 in paragraph 7, the DA has said that response to its obligation to comply has been cynically and done in bad faith. And he says, I deny this. Let me just say that when he makes this affidavit, the court knows that he does so in paragraph 3 on 586 on behalf of the first, second, and third respondents. Well, the first respondent is the company, the second are the board. Well, we question that. If he makes an affidavit on behalf of a board, one hopes that that board was correct when it gave him the instructions to make an affidavit on his behalf. And he makes the affidavit at a time when it's common cause that the board was incurably incorrect on any principle. So one questions on whose behalf.
That for the moment is a side issue on the point you're pursuing.
Yes, no, but it's relevant for costs, my lord. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, I'm going to say there are four individual human beings. It's the minister, Mr. Aguma, Mr. Motseneng, and the chairman of the board, who are potentially, and we would submit, appropriately ordered to pay the costs of this application in respect to the DA. Plus, we're going to be asking for an order that the taxpayer should not have to pay for any of their costs, including their counsel and their attorneys. And we make that point in our papers. But anyway, the point is this. He says on the next page, on page 587, that he denies it, and he says, he explains the SABC's interpretation of the report and the judgment of the SCA and this court. And he gives a background and he goes on. The difficulty for him is this. He nowhere explains why, for example, and I'll just use the example, why Mrs. Swanepoel wasn't called. And Mrs. Swanepoel comes to this court and she says, look, I made an affidavit in the application for leave to appeal against Skipper's J's judgment in the application to implement. And I explained why Mr. Motseneng bribed, cajoled, and he lied. And she explains all that in that affidavit. If the SABC would be close to bona fides, they'd have put Mrs. Swanepoel in the box and says, here's the evidence of Mrs. Swanepoel. Mr. Motseneng, your attorney or your legal representative, please cross-examine her. But she comes to this court and she says to this court, I wasn't even asked to come. And she says that, and that is before the court, not denied at all. So Mr. Aguma doesn't deal with it. And what's the explanation? The explanation is it was a charade. That's the only explanation that we submit the court must draw in respect of this case. The second aspect that I want to touch upon.
Part of the problem that arose in the latter part of 2015 is that there was this 60-day time limit for the holding of the disciplinary inquiry. And that time limit expired, in mid-December?
That's right. And there was they actually didn't comply. They asked for an extension.
So, and then there was the hiccup that Mr. Makari took the view that the disciplinary proceedings had become moot.
Because of the Davis J judgment.
Which left a very short time period in which to run an inquiry.
Correct.
Are you suggesting that the pro forma prosecutor was in any sense not doing his best in the limited time that was given to him to present the case, Mr.
Yes.
Palani?
He was doing his best to make sure that Mr. Motseneng was protected and be acquitted. Yes, that's our suggestion. The prosecutor was there at the behest of Mr. Motseneng, and I'll explain why.
Didn't he ask for a postponement to put certain material before the inquiry?
And Mr. Motseneng opposed. He was briefed the day before.
Yes, but that's a slightly different point. That might be to say that he was put in an impossible position where he simply didn't have enough time to present a case. It's a different matter to say that he was part of a conspiracy to run a sham inquiry.
I'll come to that. I will come to that. I'll come to that.
But ultimately it was the presiding officer there.
Also a sham.
That decided not to grant the postponement.
Also a sham. Part of this setup, the charade, the facade. My learned colleague said that we paint Mr. Motsoeneng as the darkness. A year ago, 2 years ago, on repeated occasions, I've said, and I'll say it again, and I don't want to be melodramatic, etc., this is a toxic cancer which needs to be cut from the body. And we look at Skeppers J's implementation order where he says, he quotes the public protector who says that Mr. Motsoeneng has operated above the law in respect of successive boards. What's happened now? We've got one...
But are you suggesting Mr. Motsoeneng has influenced all of those people to act in a particular manner?
Let me ask your lordships, when your lordship reads the papers, who appointed Mr. Mokari, Mr. Edling and the two initiators? Who did it? Let's look. We look at what the minister says, and there's a complaint by the DA that the minister did it, and that compromised the independence. So on 605, we see a letter from the minister to the remaining board member, where she says, your letter dated October 9, this is the 605, it's in response to a letter that same day on 604. On 604, let me start off. The professor says to the minister, following the outcome of the appeal, etc., the SCA, in light of the previous view held by the board about the matter, the board has deemed it prudent to request you, that's the minister, to be in charge of the appointment of the chairperson and prosecutor, and the board will concur with the appointments. That's how it starts. And we, the DA, complain about this. In order to bring finality to the matter, the board suggests that disciplinary proceedings commence without further delay, etc. Your assistance will be appreciated. On the next page, she sends a letter to say, I, the minister, hereby appoint Mokari. And the DA complained. Her answer to that is curious, because what she says, which your lordship will find at the end of her affidavit, just before those pages, the short affidavit, on 601, 602, 3, she says, on page 601, paragraph 8,
she essentially says she acted in good faith.
Then one turns to, and I do ask that the court turn to this.
Mr. Katz, I appreciate that if one reads that correspondence, it creates the impression that the board itself felt that it might be criticised for lacking independence if it appointed the chairperson and prosecutor, and therefore referred to the minister, which in context would seem to be a resort of rather dubious merit. But be that as it may, she's responding to a request from the board.
Let's see what happens, my lord. Let's see what happens. I do want to push this on 64.
And Mr. Mokari, if I may say, hardly acted as a co-conspirator.
Let's see what happens on 64. Please, my lord. Page 64, and I'll ask that your lordships turn to that. Because now we're turning to Alice in Wonderland.
Page 60?
64. And with respect to Justice Rogers, we don't take issue with the proposition that you put to us. But as soon as he did that, what happened? Let's see. On 64, one finds the charge sheet sent to Mr. Motsoeneng. And on page 66, the third page of the charge sheet, there's the suggestion, black and white, sent to him on the 12th of October, and this is 3 days after the 9th of October letters that I've just referred to at the end of the minister's affidavit. It says, in light of the above, the Minister of Communications has, and the words are, appointed Mr. Sandile July. And then, perhaps I should go back. I do want to emphasize this because it's not unimportant.
But can I just get clarity on this? The fact that Mr. Mokari, in the event, thought that the Davis judgment rendered the disciplinary proceedings moot, are you going to be submitting to us that this too was part of some Machiavellian scheme? Or was he now not doing what you say he was being expected by his masters to do?
He went rogue.
He went what?
He went rogue.
Was he ever rogue?
Well,
I mean, it's quite a serious allegation.
It's a very serious allegation. I want to come to it, my lord. Please, please. I'm coming to it. But I need to explain. On 602, in paragraph 10, she says, this is the minister, I submit with respect that my conduct was not in contempt. I also did not... This is what she says.
Are you going to fast for us?
Sorry.
602.
Well, when I say he went rogue, I say that inference can be drawn that he went rogue for the reasons that I'm going to come to now, please.
Or simply that he was trying to discharge his functions independently and never intended to do anything else.
Let me just come to that in a second. Please, if you give me 5 minutes, I'll come to the difficulty.
Yes.
I'll also do, this is on 602, this is what she says. I also did not improperly interfere with the powers of the board or of the SABC. Further submissions will be made. It is open to the applicant to simply indicate it did not persist, etc. But what she explains slightly above, she says how it became about that she played no role in the termination of the appointment of Macquarie. Your Lordship sees that. But what she says effectively in 601, 602 in paragraph 8, and this is important, the last sentence on 601, but the appointments, this is Macquarie and July, were all subject to the concurrence, agreement, approval of the board. Your Lordship sees that. And I'm going to come to that. I stated in my letter, I look forward to the board's concurrence on these appointments. There was no expectation that the board would simply rubber stamp my recommendations. But now, let's see what actually happens. On page 67, which is the page after the charge sheet. So we have this dispute. Who actually appointed these people? Let's see what happens. So what the minister says is, I made this recommendation. Who would appoint? Well, ultimately the board would do it, and they wouldn't be expected to be a rubber stamp. That's what she says. And that's what the minister tells this court. She tells this court last week. What actually happened is on page 67, on the 14th of October, there's a reference number, SABC round robin B31 14 10 15, and then it's got a board, and it says, dear members, and this is from the group company secretary. May I just turn to the middle of the page? In order to ensure the independence of the board, a request was submitted to the Honourable Minister to appoint an independent chairperson, etc., in respect of the disciplinary proceedings. The Honourable Minister has subsequently approved the appointment of Macquarie, etc. The Governance Committee has approved the appointments. And then there's a resolution, and this is what he's put up. This board approved. It didn't rubber stamp the minister's appointment. But who is in the board? Turn up the page, the top of the page, attention, there are 9 names, including Mr. Motsoeneng. Motsoeneng was involved in appointing Mr. Macquarie and Mr. July.
Well, that's not the evidence, and knowing how minutes come into existence, if one is just carrying forward a template of who the directors are, I think that's rather slender evidence to say that they would have been silly to include Mr. Macquarie as, Mr. Motsoeneng as a director. Is there any evidence that Mr. Motsoeneng received this and signed this as a director?
If he didn't, then they weren't called to do it. There are 9 names there. There were only 9.
Yes, but it seems to be common cause that by the 14th of September, a month previously, they were... that was...
2015. Sorry, my lord, this is 2015. There are 9 members. The Act says there have to be 9. They're the 9 names, including Mr. Motsoeneng. Mr. Motsoeneng approved, in the words of the minister, didn't rubber stamp. He approved his own chairman of his disciplinary committee. He was the one who approved.
But he was part of 9 people. Excuse me. He's part of 9 people.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, the evidence put up, the answer is that the inclusion of his name there was an error.
Well, then they weren't quorate.
That may be.
That may be so.
But you're arguing a conspiracy point. The fact that they weren't quorate because Mr. Motsoeneng was precluded from participating in this decision is a different matter.
Well, are you not taking a bridge too far here on this particular point?
Those are submissions, and certainly not a bridge too far. Your Lordship just has to read Skipper's J, just has to read the SEA, just read Javer's J, read Skipper's J in the implementation order. No bridge too far. You heard your Lordship put to a learned friend, the second applicant this morning for an amicus. Well, why are you here? And then they say, well, because of the local content. And then the point being, well, we all know what this is about. I read in the News 24, and I don't want to need evidence, and I invite our learned colleagues to deny it. I read in the on Sunday that Mr. Motsoeneng now, today, 16th, whatever it is, or November, is still sitting in the same office that he had as COO. The same physical office, and I invite Mr. Bester and Mr. Du Toit to deny that. Is he sitting in the same physical office? And they say it's well guarded on the 27th floor of SABC.
Well, what's that got to do with the issues?
He is the controlling animus. There's one non-executive director. The public protector said he's the one who operated above the law in respect of successive boards. What's the problem? What's this systemic problem, this chronic difficulty at the SABC? This toxic difficulty that's called Mr. Motsoeneng. That's the difficulty. And your Lordship can say, well, Mr. Motsoeneng's here is an error.
Yes, I just think if you're wanting to advance the argument you've just summarized, there might be better arguments than this one.
Well, I can't think of a better argument to say that a disciplinary proceeding is a charade.
No.
When the person who is subject to it
matter.
helps point the chairperson and the initiator. I'm charged with an offence at the bar. I go along and I help decide who's going to prosecute me. I go along and I help who decides to check.
But your case is that the board did just rubber stamp the minister's decision, which is why there was interference. Now, you can't run that case simultaneously with saying, well, the board did really make the appointment, and the real problem is that Motsoeneng was party to it.
It's all part and parcel of the same difficulty. It's a basket. And to cut this into slices of saying the narrow aspect of, well, the board didn't rubber stamp, or they did rubber stamp, whichever way you cut it, there's a charade at stake here. Mala fide, it's a bad process, and there's not a word from anybody as to why Mrs. Swanepoel wasn't called. And the excuse, well, the Mukari problem happened and there was a time problem. It's not dealt with on the papers. There's no suggestion. Well, we tried to phone Mari Swanepoel, but her phone didn't ring and we were in a rush because Mr. Eerdling said that proceedings must go forward. There's nothing like that. So it's just conjecture, and it's been the simplest thing in the world for somebody from the SABC. They know because it's in our founding papers to say, yes, it's true we didn't call Mari Swanepoel, but she was in hospital. But there's nothing. And she would have proven the case. Well, she may have, we don't know. Charade. Put her in the box and let her evidence be tested. Didn't happen. So, my Lord, we would submit that on the common cause facts as set out, the only conclusion that the court can come to is that it was a charade, mala fide, an attempt to comply, and the attempt failed miserably for all the reasons that
Just remind me the evidence of the appointment of the persons who did actually act as prosecutor and chairperson in the event, Mr. Eerdling and Mr. Palani. There the minister says she wasn't involved. Now I know you raise a point because there's some board member who says, well, the board also wasn't involved. But what is the state of the evidence? I'm not sure on the material before us we can find that the minister had any role to play in the appointment of the BT.
Good question, Mark. It's a good question. That's part of the problem. It's part of the problem. What is their status? Who appointed them? That's the question. Let's assume it wasn't the minister. Who was it? Was it the professor? Was it Mr. Motsoeneng? SABC don't tell you.
Well, there's very little here to come to that any definite conclusion as to who appointed
No,
them.
the problem, my Lord, is this. There is nothing, not very little, there is nothing. It's not little. It's the simplest thing in the world to say, there's a public protector's report, we have to comply. Skipper's J found this, the SCA found this, the Constitutional Court in Kandla found this is what we did. Terribly sorry, we were bona fide. They don't tell you what they did. When we say it was mala fide and a charade, but they say, no, we bona fide, but they don't tell you what they did. What inference can you draw from their failure to tell you who did what and when they did it and why they did it?
Mr. Katz, I just want to be sure, though, who the allegation of mala fides is directed at. The chairperson of the inquiry, who's on the face of it an independent advocate from Bloemfontein, do you say that he was a knowing party to a charade, or that he was simply chairing an inquiry that was presented in an ineffectual manner?
Well, there's a case called Tantush, in respect of which there's reference, that's a judgment of His Lordship Mercury J, in respect of which there's an application of cash paymaster from the late 90s.
Now, can I just ask what the answer to my question is?
Where there is a review of, in those cases, one was a tender case and one was a refugee appeal board. What the courts say is when it comes to Rule 53, the presiding officer's job, the decision maker whose decision is impugned, general rule is you put up the Rule 53 record and you file an affidavit to explain what happened. But you don't file an opposing affidavit unless, and this is the important point, to answer your Lordship Rogers, there's an allegation of mala fide or bias in respect to the decision maker. On the founding papers, there is a suggestion of charade, and it's not answered by Mr. Palani and Mr.
That's what I was concerned with, because it wasn't clear to me from the founding papers that an allegation of mala fides was directed at the chairperson of the inquiry. So can you just show me where I will find that?
Lord, I just want to finish the point. To the extent that your Lordships find that it's not necessary to go to certain aspects of the mala fide, bona fide aspect, We don't ask that the court make a mala fide finding against Mr. Edling and Mr. Polani.
No, but I want to know what your case is, and it's not clear to me that that is even your case. It's not a question of whether we go there or not.
My Lord, our submission is the entire process of the disciplinary inquiry was a charade. That's our case. In order for that submission to come home, obviously by necessity, those involved in the disciplinary proceeding itself must have somehow been implicated in that charade, that sham, by necessity. But I don't want to be suggested that, and of course the simple issue is, Mr. Edling, Mr. Polani could have said, this is what we did. There's nothing. How does your Lordship deal with this? You can only come to the conclusion we would submit that it's a charade. We make the point that Mr.
But coming back to
Aguma
the
says,
question raised by my learned brother, he specifically asked, can you point out in terms of the papers where you, in the founding affidavit, made that serious allegation against the chairperson of the disciplinary committee?
well, let me turn to page 31. On page 31, we start in paragraph 63, and we say, if the court will find we're entitled to determine the merits, and your Lordship knows this argument, the one argument that I'm going to leave, my friend, Mr. Lamastani, is the question of whether or not it was open for the SABC only to go to the question of sanction, or whether they need to go to the merits as well. We deal with that before paragraph 63, but in paragraph 63 and following, we deal with this in turn. In paragraph 64, we say the board, SABC's chairperson, and the minister deliberately engaged in a pattern of conduct that rendered the disciplinary proceeding wholly ineffective and futile, and which do not comply with, and I don't need to repeat the SCA judgment in matter of Skipper's J, etc., etc. And then we explain in detail in paragraph 66, in summary, the record available indicates that, blah, 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 and we go on and on and on. Yes. My Lord, the point is this, none of this is answered. We don't have an answer to this. And on Plascon Evans,
if a chairperson of a disciplinary inquiry who's faced with an ineffectual presentation of the employer's case may feel he's got no choice but to refuse postponement because hasn't been properly justified, and to dismiss the charges because there's insufficient evidence. Now, one can quite properly conclude that that was an ineffectual process without implicating the chairperson.
I've made that point, my Lord. I've made that point. If that's the court's finding in respect of the chairperson of the disciplinary, or Mr. Polani, we're not going to quibble with that. But
what certainly isn't explained is why Mr. Polani is, as it were, given the brief on the morning and told that he's got to be ready to run the case that evening.
Who gave him the brief, my Lord?
Well, we don't know. Not on the papers here before.
No, that's my point, my Lord. When there's a suggestion of a charade, who gave it to him? I ask rhetorically. This is Alice in Wonderland stuff, and that's why it's all very well saying, Mr. Motsoeneng's name happens to be one of those people who appointed his own prosecutor and his own chairperson. It's all very well sort of swatting it away. His name shouldn't have been there. But everything points, everything, human experience, context, points to him being the driving force behind his own acquittal. He was the COO at the time, and you recall that at that time, he was in law suspended from being the CEO for various reasons. But he chose not to be suspended, special leave.
Can I ask a different question which arises in the disciplinary inquiry, and I'm sure you are going to come to it at some stage. The first basis on which you attack the disciplinary inquiry is that the Public Protector's report did not permit an inquiry which concerned itself with the merits but only with sanction. At the moment, the board now seems to accept that state of affairs. I'm not sure that Mr. Motsoeneng does. But either way, it may well feature and be decided in the review in Gauteng. It seems undesirable, unless we're forced to do so, to decide the disciplinary review on that ground.
We would agree with your Lordship, subject to what the Public Protector says. It's not something that I intended to argue, and I'll leave that to Mr. Lavaskhachny, I said a few minutes ago. The one thing that the DA submit, this court needs to find, however you deal with that particular aspect, we made our submissions that the Public Protector is correct in how they interpret the remedial action and its consequences. We support the Public Protector. That's really a Public Protector issue rather than a DA issue. The DA's issue is this was a charade mala fide in order to subvert the Constitution and the judgments of the courts and the public protector, however one calls it.
So
that's
one
our
might,
submission.
assuming you are right on the charade argument, one would say that this proceeding must be set aside either because it was impermissible having regard to the public protector's report and remedial action, alternatively if her remedial action does not have the meaning for which the DA contends, it didn't achieve its purpose of inquiring properly into the merits.
So maybe
your argument about a charade is that the merits were not properly inquired into.
As a piece of the court.
That question will only arise if the merits are up for debate in the disciplinary inquiry, and that is something that might stand or fall by the Gauteng review.
It's subject to this, because even if the merits weren't up for grabs, so-called, along the lines of the public protector's interpretation of her own report, it was still nevertheless necessary for the SABC to hand lined up Mrs. Swanepoel for purposes of sanction. They didn't bother to phone her. So whichever way you look at it.
Well, I'm not sure about that. If you accepted everything the public protector said, I'm not sure what Ms. Swanepoel could still add to it.
Sanction. She could have...
In regard to sanction?
No, of course. She could have said, my lord, the evidence is devastating as far as we are concerned. Mr. Motsoeneng tells in an affidavit, Skipper's J, that the reason, and he says this in terms, the reason that Mrs. Swanepoel hasn't made an affidavit is because I couldn't get hold of her. That's what he says.
Yes, but this may be another question, but he's not facing a disciplinary charge. He perhaps should have. That in the Western Cape review proceedings, in the Skipper's case, if I can call it that, he didn't tell the truth about Ms. Swanepoel. But once he's not faced with that charge, how does calling her to say, well, he also lied before Skipper's J?
Sanction, my lord, sanction.
Well, that's really saying here's another thing he did wrong, so dismiss it.
Not just wrong, he's a liar and a perjurer. He perjured himself in respect of the proceedings before this court and effectively the SCA. How can that not have... So, for example, there may be let's say his matric certificate. Let's say he's guilty of having, let's say, used Mr. Kloppers to avoid the matric difficulty. Let's assume that. It may, 20 years down the line, well, he's become a mature man, as Mr. Orense has said about him. You shouldn't fire him, blah, blah, blah. That was Mr. Orense's argument. 20 years down the line, he's still lying about the very issue. Of course it applies to sanction. It's not just about him. In 20 years ago, he was a young man, and maybe he's caught up in the euphoria of 1994. They needed a vendor-speaking person in Bloemfontein to start off the radio station, or whatever the language is. So he lied about his matric certificate. Let's forgive him. But no, not when 20 years later, he lies, and he tries to bribe the person who he's lied about with SABC money. And your lordship puts to me that wouldn't have anything to do with sanction. We would disagree. It's got everything to do with sanction. And not just sanction in respect to the disciplinary proceedings, sanction in respect to the remedial action. The remedial action asks that the money that was fruitlessly and wastefully expended be recovered from those who did it. There's not an iota of evidence from the SABC they're even considering that for all those labour disputes that have millions of rand, 28 million in one calendar year wasted by Mr. Motsoeneng. Whose money is that? It's our money that she filed. And there's no evidence that they even consider charging the man with that and trying to get the money back from him or any of the others. We would submit charade, whichever way one looks at it in the context of this case and human experience, the only conclusion that we submit that this court can come to. He was the driving hand, start to finish, of that disciplinary proceeding. So, my lord, with that in mind, may I turn to the other case. In the other case, it raises a range of interesting issues, only one of which we submit is of any proper interest. The other bits of interest, as I might call it, are retreads and defective retreads of arguments raised in this court and other courts over and over and over, and been rejected by this court and the SCA over and over and over, such as the stay application, such as the non-urgency. These issues, the parliamentary PCC prematurity argument, they all have been dealt with by this court, and your lordships will be happy to follow in the footsteps of those before your lordship to reject those arguments for the contempt they deserve. There's one argument that I do need to emphasize, and that is that on the 14th of September this year, when the SCA endorsed Davis J's order setting aside the appointment, what became the status from a labour rights perspective, from Section 23 of the Constitution, situation vis-a-vis Mr. Motsoeneng. And that's the only issue of true interest in this case. Our primary submission, perhaps not articulated in our heads of argument the way we would have preferred, is this. Mr. Motsoeneng was an ordinary executive employee of the SABC until such time as his statutory appointment as the COO. At that point, there was a break in his labour rights, and he developed new labour rights such as they may have existed. So, for example, by analogy, he was the executive manager or supervisor at Telkom. He gets offered a job at the SABC as the COO, and he accepts it, and he becomes the COO of SABC. What happens to his Telkom job? It disappears. So his labour rights vis-a-vis the SABC, such as they were when he was appointed the COO, disappeared, by analogy to the Telkom example.
So are you saying that whatever position he might have held previously, that have disappeared in terms of his rights?
For two reasons. One, it was a statutory appointment by an appointing body different to his original appointing body. He had a totally new regime imposed upon him. This wasn't a promotion from, for example, a packer to a driver, or from a clerk to a supervisor. It was a whole new regime that applied to him with a whole series of different rights and obligations. He became a member of the board as appointed in terms of the Broadcasting Act. The Lordship knows the provisions of the Broadcasting Act dealing with governance. It's a very different type of position, and your Lordship will know this is not, when he gets appointed as the COO, he is not, for purposes of this debate, part of Part 7 of the Broadcasting Act, which deals with the staff of the corporation. He is subject to Part 5 of Chapter 4. And there one has a different staffing regime, if I may call it that, compared to, as I've explained, Part 7. And who appoints him? That one finds Section 13. So, by the way, Section 26 is the staff. But if I may just turn to Section 13. The 12 non-executive members must be appointed by the President on the advice of the National Assembly.
If my understanding, there's 15 members, isn't it, in terms of the board?
12 non-executive appointed by the President on the advice of the National Assembly. Subsection 2, the non-executive must be appointed in a manner ensuring, etc. Not relevant for our purposes. Then it says the President must designate one of the members of the board referred to in subsection 2 as the chairperson and another member as the deputy, both of whom must be non-executive, etc. Perhaps just for sake of completeness, I'm going to jump and then come back. Section 1310 deals with quorum, and at some point on the papers there was a suggestion, I think by the Minister, that what we submit the quorum provision means is not correct because of Section 66 of the Companies Act. To put paid to that, Your Lordship, Mr. Justice Rogers' judgment in De Vries versus Eden District Municipality, in particular paragraph 29, puts paid to any suggestion that Section 1310 doesn't mean what it says it means. We've included that in our heads of argument. I know the Minister has now turned around and agreed with the what we submit is the proper interpretation of Section 1310.
So the argument essentially is that the Minister could not have relied on Section 66(1) of the Companies Act to say that the port is great, because it doesn't apply.
That's what she said. That's what she's alleged to have said. Now she says, well, she doesn't say that, but what she now says is that it's true that there are 9, and therefore Mr. Guana's appointment was improper because of the fact that they weren't 9. She says that now. I mean, beforehand, the Lordship knows that debate. The point I was making is that the big point I was making is that once Mr. Motseneng was appointed for purposes of this debate to a position under Section 12B, which one of those 3 persons, Chief Group CEO, CCO, and Chief Financial Officer, they're the executive members. Once he was appointed as such, whatever rights he may have had, which he certainly may have had rights, they fell away. They disappeared, as in my words, which it
becomes a dangerous thing to be appointed in an act that can potentially be reviewed, because you say if through no fault of yours, the appointment turns out to be invalid, you're left with nothing, not even what you had before.
That's the way the world works. That's the way the world works. Telkom, let me, and your Lordship will recall in the Similani judgment, that's what happened to Mr. Menzi Similani. He was the Director General of the Department of Justice. He came across, became Deputy NDPP. A couple of weeks later, the President decided, well, new NDPP, and they appoint him. Now, what would have happened, as it turned out, could DCJ set aside that appointment? What would happen? Let's assume he hadn't become the Deputy in that little window period. Would he have gone back to become the Director General of Justice? Obviously not. It would be absurd. The Telkom example. So these, and I make the point, Your Lordship.
Well, the position is he might remain an employee, as it were, without portfolio, and some decision would have to be made in the employment context as what then to do with him.
At the Department of Justice?
No, I'm back to Mr. Motseneng. If his appointment as COO is set aside, one might say, well, that doesn't affect his employment relationship, and he's there with whatever his remuneration package is until his employment is either lawfully terminated or he's redeployed lawfully to some position.
That's alternative argument. That's alternative argument. Your Lordship knows that's alternative argument, that were that to be the position, this alternative argument, that he maintains some labour rights, then what the SABC did in this case was a blind, jackbooted approach that he is who he is, and therefore we're going to keep him where he is. And when Your Lordship has regard to that attitude of the SABC, which ignores Your Lordship's suggested approach, what conclusion can you come to other than he is the SABC? With respect. The SABC don't even consider, well, the CIO position was set aside. What to do with him? They don't think like that. Why that? Because it's him thinking. And that's our submission.
Are you suggesting the professor is not thinking at all? The professor of the board, is he not thinking at all on your argument? He's also part of the board.
Well, at the moment, he is the board. If we weren't in Alice in Wonderland, where's there anything what he was thinking? He would have told Your Lordships, Professor. Not a piece of paper from him. Doesn't need to. Mr. Motseneng is his mouth spokesperson. We watch press conferences. You can take judicial notice of what happens. The professor talks a little bit. Things get a bit rough. Waters get a bit rough. Who dives into with the paddles? Mr. Motseneng. I didn't just say it. It's there. So, what we submit is. Let's look at the relief we seek from that. I see we've gone past the tea agenda, I'd like to carry through.
Yes, you may.
The relief we seek in this application, in the main application, is on page 1. And I want to emphasize what it is that we seek, because what seems to us to have happened is both the SABC and Mr. Motseneng, in their approach to this case, have mischaracterized what we seek. And once it has become clear what we do seek and not what we don't seek, a lot of their argument falls away. So in paragraph 1, which is on page 2, there is a declaratory prayer, which is that it is declared that unless and until all the negative findings are reviewed and set aside. Do your Lordship have that?
Yes.
Now, what they say we seek ignores the words unless and until reviewed and set aside by a court. It's almost as if those words don't exist. And what we say is that it's not dissimilar in kind, in effect, to that which we sought and were granted by Skipper's J, affirmed by the FCA, which is a suspension pending something else. So it's a declarative that until something else happens, Mr. Motsoeneng may not be there. In those cases, it was that he couldn't be the COO. Now, it's not that he can't be the COO in this interim space. He can't be there at all, bearing in mind the charade and bearing in mind the 2.5-year dance that the taxpayers paid in order to keep Mr. Motsoeneng as the SABC. So that's why we submit that how they characterize what we seek is wrong. It's not a final interdict or anything of it. It's a declarator that for an interim period, he may not be there at all. He may not hold any position at all in the South African Broadcasting Corporation. Now, may I just flip through Mr. Motsoeneng's heads
Just before you go further, but that does not imply he might not be present to be an employee of the SABC.
It does.
According to you, it just can't hold in the position.
Sorry, Mano?
Does that also characterize he can't be an employee?
Can't be. Indeed. It's far-reaching, but far-reaching cases call for far-reaching remedy.
Sorry, do you mean he can't be paid?
I'll come to that. I'll come to that when I come to, in particular, the 2 judgments of Skipper's J, affirmed by the FCA. I'll come to that question. Well, I can just imagine that if your lordships make an order to the effect that he can continue being paid while on so-called suspension, one wonders how many millions of rand his salary will increase in the years between your lordship's order and when he is finally...
We don't necessarily need to decide that he must or mustn't be paid, but the question is whether we should make an order which definitely declares that he mustn't. In which certain legal consequences might flow from an order, but I'm not sure that we should be determining that in labour law the effect of what has happened is that he shouldn't be paid at all.
Correct. But your lordship put the question to me, and I would answer it in the way that we know what's going to happen. We've seen this song before. The record doesn't change.
Well, in regard to timing, can I just ask, I think the Gauteng Review, have the supplementary founding papers been served yet by the SABC?
We have no idea.
Is your client a party?
No,
a cited party?
we were not cited as a party.
Are you intending to intervene?
I don't have instructions in that respect yet. I've given certain advice, but we don't have instructions.
The public protector has...
Is certainly a party.
Yes, but has she filed a notice of opposition, or is she abiding?
Well, I don't know, but what I do know is in this court, before Samela J, the public protector made submissions, and you'll hear them later this morning, which suggested that case is a no-hoper. And
I'm not so concerned with whether it's a no-hoper or not, but what is the likely time frame for it being decided, because it really should be decided sooner rather than later.
Absolutely. We're not involved. It should have been on the roll already in a case like this. But of course, who's driving the case? The SABC. And now what I've heard now in the last couple of weeks is Mr. Motsoeneng's applied to intervene.
Well, I would have thought that given this case and the role your client has played up to now, it certainly has an interest sufficient to intervene in that case. But of course,
Your
whether you
Lordship's
wish to or
comment is
not.
not dissimilar to the advice that I've given, but we'll take that as it comes.
No, because
my attorney is sitting in front of me and she smiles.
Because it's not only the it's not the applicants who dictate the pace of an application. The respondents, if they oppose it, have certain rights to ensure that time limits are complied with.
Yes, my Lord, your Lordship is absolutely right. And your Lordship is right. And my Lord, in Samela J's judgment, he refers to a case, and just for the sake of completeness, I just want to hand up an extract from the case that he should have cited, but he cited the wrong case entirely because of me. What the case was about was the doctrine of preemption. When the SCA approved Skipper's J's order that Mr. Motseneng must be subject to a disciplinary inquiry, one of our arguments before Samela J in the stay application was that the SABC had preempted their right to bring the review that is now pending in the Gauteng court because they'd complied with they'd purported to comply with the public protector's remedial action. Your Lordship knows the argument, your Lordships have seen it. And what Samela J did was he dismissed the stay application inter alia on the basis that the preemption argument may be a good one in the Pretoria court. Your Lordship will recall that.
But are you wanting us to find that the Gauteng review has been preempted?
Well, I'm just making... The doctrine of preemption was, in our submission, given a proper stamp of approval or set out the criteria in a case before the Supreme Court of Appeal, in a case called Von Arber, which I've just given your Lordships. In Samela's judgment, he referred to the Von Arber case, but in not this case, another case which was decided by the Constitutional Court. And I wouldn't want your Lordships to fall into the same trap that Samela J...
Now, why do you think we will fall in the same trap?
Because you're not being offered... You wouldn't, because I've now given you this, which I should have given to Samela J, but now I'm giving it to your Lordship, so your Lordship can avoid the trap that we set for Samela J.
Mr. Katz, the issue is not so much the doctrine of preemption. Obviously, it can apply, I think, to review proceedings as much to other sorts of proceedings. The question is whether there was a waiver with full knowledge of rights, and the SABC's case is going to be, and I presume Mr. Motseneng's in the Gauteng review, that they went through the disciplinary process on a particular view of the public protector's report in order that the merits were up for grabs. And in doing that, they now think that they've erred, and what they have to do is attack the public protector's report. It doesn't seem to me a slam dunk case of preemption.
I've never made that submission, but it's something that it's a factor that your Lordships will take. It's a factor that Samela J took into account in his decision to reject the stay application. And we would offer the same proposition to your Lordships for the purpose of deciding the stay application that is now before this court. So when your Lordships suggest it's not a slam dunk, it's certainly an argument worth pursuing. And that being so, we would submit that it's a factor, and we would submit an important factor. But anyway, your Lordship knows the argument. The stay application has been tried, it's tested, and it's rejected. Your Lordships are confronted with it again. The urgency, well, I'll come to that. I will come to that. But what I was dealing with was the prayer one of the main case. Before I continue with that prayer, I do wish to just flip through very quickly the heads of argument of Mr. Motseneng with reference to some aspects of our bundle. In doing so, I want to address one aspect which comes through in respect of all three opposing heads of argument, and that is that were your Lordships be inclined to make any declarator under 172.1a, the court should consider making a suspension or limiting of retrospective order in respect of those declarators because of 172.1b, the just and equitable relief. I have three submissions to make in that respect. Nowhere on the papers do we find it suggested that that would be just and equitable by way of, and importantly, and I want to emphasize this, evidence. Not argument, evidence. And for that proposition, we referred to the case of Darwood. I hope it's in the small bundle that I gave you. Oh, yeah, I'll just hand up the case. On paragraph 17 of Darwood, I'm handing it out. It says
I'm just trying to understand the retrospectivity point. Why is that relevant to paragraph 1? I thought it was raised in regard to Mr. Tugwana.
3.1 and 3.2 of the other case, yes. Yes. But I'm making the point as a general proposition that your Lordship is now confronted with prayer 1, which is a declarator, and in regard to all the other prayers, 2.1, 2.2, etc., they all are of a similar type, which is a declaratory order. And I just want to put to bed the notion that were your Lordship to come to the DA's assistance in respect of the declarators, what should you then do? For example, your Lordship put to me about for example, his salary, if it is to be declared
a declaratory order can't be retrospective or prospective. It declares the position.
Well, my Lord, with respect, that's a debate that I've been having with myself for 15 years.
Now you're having it with me.
And it seems that the Minister says that to the extent, well, it could, my Lord, let me just say this.
It's the consequential relief, such as setting something aside, which can be retrospective or not.
Let's assume you declare, for example, that Mr. Garner was unlawfully appointed as the COO, acting COO. Let's assume you make that declaration. As we understand the argument, you may then suspend that declaration of invalidity until such time as there's a proper COO appointed. That's how I understand the argument. I understand that there's a distinction between suspending or limiting retrospective orders in respect of legislation rather than conduct. I understand the conceptual difficulty. I understand that. But it seems to me that the Constitutional Court has, in the last few years, there are various cases, Masetle in particular, developed the notion that that the court can, under 172(1)b, suspend the declaration of invalidity of conduct. But the point being, we submit your Lordships don't have to go there for a simple reason. There's no evidence of any kind that any just and equitable remedy should flow from your Lordship's declarations were you to come to the conclusion that a declaration was appropriate. And that's paragraph 17 of Darwin. So this whole intellectual debate of whether you can or can't suspend limit retrospectivity in respect of conduct, declarations in validity in respect of conduct, is interesting, but it doesn't apply in this case, despite our learned friends trying to squeeze it in. So in paragraph 17 on page 953, what the Constitutional Court says is our constitutionally recognized the separation of powers. Within this scheme, the court is given special and onerous responsibilities once it concludes, etc. Now, the important sentence is the next one. Such an order may be tempered, and this is the order that our learned friends suggest. Such an order should be tempered by ancillary orders that are just and equitable. That's the wording of the Constitution. In light of this constitutional theme, this court can, this is the important word, can best carry out its task if careful and detailed what? Evidence. And we emphasize the word evidence, and in this case there is none. So when your Lordship comes to decide, well, what about the Minister, the SABC and Mr. Motseneng, your Lordship will wrap them over the knuckles for providing no evidence at all. Yes, they provide an argument, the next sentence. But no evidence are placed before it by those in government qualified to do so, particularly when legislation is under challenge. So there's a suggestion from the Minister, well, we need a COO. The scheme needs a COO. So let Mrs. Tugwana stay, despite the fact that she was unlawfully appointed. That's the argument. There's no evidence of that. Nothing. And if they had put up evidence, the DA might have dealt with it. Probably would have. So we suggest...
So your argument, in the absence of any evidence, the court can't go so far?
I wouldn't say the court can't go so far in all circumstances, but in this case, because there's no evidence, the court should be very slow to come to the assistance of a party who says, listen, yes, it's true that we acted unlawfully, but temper it with an ancillary order that allows, for example, this unlawful position to continue, which is what they say. Now, why should your Lordships come to their assistance when they don't assist your Lordships to come to that just and equitable result?
Well, they may say it's the statutory scheme that there must be a COO, or at least an acting COO.
Well, when your Lordship puts that proposition to me...
Of course, it does seem rather Alice in Wonderland to say we must suspend we must allow an invalid COO to fulfill the requirement of the law that there must be a COO. I appreciate the incongruity of the submission.
And let me just say, just two aspects of this. There's no evidence, or argument for that matter, why Mr. Oguma can't fill his acting COO position. Two, it allows for an abuse. So you have a non-corporate board, minister or whatever, appoint somebody unlawfully, knowing at the back of their heads, well, we've got this COO who's unlawfully appointed, but we know, don't worry about it. The courts will let this person continue for a while. And then you won't be able
either way, this seems to relate primarily to the position of Mr. Kwana. Nobody seems to say that, well, I'm not sure if anybody says that if we find that Mr. Motsoeneng's appointment to corporate affairs must be set aside, that it's imperative that he should nevertheless be able to, either that he's done anything since his appointment that needs to be saved, or that he's going to have to do things afterwards which need to be preserved.
I've looked at the council in this room, Mr. Labaskachny, Mr. Mayosi and Mr. Bishop in my turn, and Mr. Manechi, who've been here since day one. The rest haven't. Who knows what will come out there? So I would predict that that's not going to be argued. I just don't know. But there's no evidence that any declaration that the court might be inclined to make should have an ancillary order tempering the effect of it. That's, as I lead into our learned friends' heads of argument, as a general proposition, I make that. The suggestion that this just and equitable suspension, limiting and retrospective has no place in this case for the reason that I've articulated. It may have in some other case, and it may even have in cases, for example, where there is no evidence laid for a variety of reasons. But in this case, it's certainly not appropriate. I want to just turn to Mr. Motsoeneng's heads and deal with, and I'll come back to the broader spectrum of the relief, but prayer 1 is an important one. And of course, if your Lordship is with us in prayer 1, then the prayers 6 to 10 of the disciplinary committee hearing may not be appropriate. But I'll come to that. Let me just jump, but I'll come back to that. On page 13,
am I right that in the case of Mr. Motsoeneng, we have heads of argument, yes, in the latest review proceedings, what you've called the main case?
Yes.
The only heads we have from him in respect of the disciplinary case were the ones filed in May.
That's how I understand it.
So you're now talking about the recent heads.
Then in paragraph 38, I just want to touch on 38 and 39, and I'll come back to the earlier part. But I just want to knock this out the way because we would submit that what I'm going to say about paragraphs 38 and 39, with all due respect to our learned friends, should be a marker as to how the court should regard Mr. Motsoeneng's submissions. In paragraph 38, it is suggested that Davis J has already categorized alleged public interest the DA has in the SABC as a clear instance of politicking in the court. And that's the theme of Mr. Motsoeneng. What is the DA doing politicking in this court? And then there is a quote from paragraph 4 of Davis's judgment. I've handed your Lordships a bundle where I'd like to just read the balance of that paragraph to demonstrate the difficulty with that submission. It's on page 472 in paragraph 4. It says what the last words in the quoted paragraph are become commonplace in South Africa. And this is what Davis J goes on to say. And I ask that your Lordship emphasize this. Or we ask that we emphasize to your Lordship. The applicant, that the DA, thus bases its case on arguments which contend that the decisions both to recommend and later appoint Mr. Motsoeneng as the COO are procedurally and substantially irrational. These arguments require this court to examine and evaluate the merits of these submissions, notwithstanding, and this is the point, notwithstanding that this dispute can be described as lawfare. It is the court's role to examine whether the appointment was made in terms of the principle of legality, only after which deference must be paid to the choice of a democratically elected minister. And this is the next two sentences we would urge upon your Lordships. Courts are the custodians of the principle of legality as it is sourced in the Constitution. Where this principle is invoked, and we invoke this principle, courts are obliged to enter the arena. And then there's a sentence, beyond the scope of this principle, invitation to be a custodian must be firmly refused. So to suggest, as Mr. Motsoeneng does, that the DA is politicking in this court, inappropriately it's suggested, and with all these other references, has been rejected by this court, been rejected by the SCA. been rejected by the Constitutional Court, and Mr. Motsoeneng still comes to this court and he says that. And your Lordship puts to me, is this a charade? In the next paragraph, they suggest, Lord Law warns in prime media broadcasting. Now your Lordship should recall that judgment. It was a split bench of this division between, on the one hand, Savage J and then Lord Law J, with whom Henny J concurred. Perhaps Mr. Motsoeneng didn't realize that on the 29th of September, that Lewis J, for a full Supreme Court of Appeal, rejected the thinking of Lord Law J and went with the Savage J line of authority. So we would suggest that when your Lordship has regard to these types of difficulties, of quoting a split decision of this court, which has been rejected by the SCA a few weeks ago, your Lordships will be minded to...
But the assertion is essentially made is that the DA wants to come to court whenever they can't win their battles outside.
Yes, that's the argument. These are not battles outside. This is a battle for legality. And it's not about votes, getting votes in the next election or votes here or there. This is about whether or not, and that's your Lordship's task, and what Davis J says. When it comes to either the DA has standing or it doesn't, and it does have standing, courts have recognized that from as long ago as Samalani. And the question is this: where this principle is invoked, the principle of legality, your Lordships are obliged to enter the arena. And to suggest otherwise is contrary to everything the Constitution holds dear. In other words, whether it's politicking, whether it's an NGO, whether it's an individual, Mr. Glenister, whether it's the Treatment Action Campaign, if they come to court and they say, look, there's a problem with legality, it's not open to a court to say, you are a political party, go and fight your battles at the electoral, in the streets, if it's legality. And that's
but it appears that these type of cases are on the rise and we're being swamped with it.
Yes, and you know why, my lord? Because Parliament is failing. That's why you need it. Parliament is failing. That's what Nkanda judgment said. The Constitutional Court said to Parliament, why aren't you, Parliament, holding the Executive to account? And erupted
I think on this particular argument, that would probably be Mr. Motsoeneng's submission, that in this particular instance, Parliament isn't failing because they've got an inquiry underway. Well, I mean, he doesn't say you can't be here. He says we should exercise our discretion not to...
Well, firstly, it's a bad...
I know there are other answers to it, but...
No. In Mazibuko versus Sisulu, the same type of argument where Parliament changing the rules and therefore you, Constitutional Court, don't get involved in it. Your Lordship will recall that. Point is this, 2 points. Firstly, it's an irrelevant suggestion. And in any event, it's wrong.
Why is it irrelevant if Parliament has decided, listen here, we're now going to have an inquiry and we will deal with it appropriately?
For 2 reasons. Your Lordship is confronted with legality challenge. It doesn't matter what Parliament find, one way or the other. They could find he's a bad guy, a good guy, he's bad for the SABC. It's irrelevant. Your Lordship is challenged with legality. That's first. 2, and in any event, in this case, the PCC, the suggestion, premature, that's the argument about prematurity. What's the PCC going to do with Mr. Motsoeneng? They have no role. We've seen their terms of reference. We've seen Section 13. We've seen how the scheme of the Broadcasting Act works. He's an employee on his version. He's no longer a member of the board. I mean, it's absurd that the PCC can be suggested to deal with a non-member of the board. That's all they can deal with.
So you're saying he's no longer even a member of the board, so therefore whatever the PCC might decide doesn't affect Mr. Motsoeneng?
Common cause. That's common cause. It's common cause.
Because...
Well, when I say he's no longer a member of the board, I just want to remember, my lord, he's not only the shadow, I say in truth he is the board, but officially as a part of the legality position, he's not a member of the board. On his own version, he's not a member of the board, but he sits in the same office that he had before, according to the News 24 website that I read. 600 million rand this, 600 million rand that. And South Africa beat Australia twice in cricket. I read there, why? We can't hear it on the radio. It's one of the things I like going to. Mr. Motsoeneng. He didn't send Nicholas Germanis or whoever it was to go and comment on the cricket. But anyway.
But why should the SABC favour your liking?
Not mine, but maybe I should listen to different type of music, but that's not the point. I mean, it becomes funny in a way. When I was before Skipper's J, the day before the case, we saw Generations. I don't know if we've seen Generations. The cast of Generations were going on strike because Mr. Motsoeneng wasn't doing what he was supposed to be doing. So we knew we were going to watch SABC that night. The question was whether Generations was going to come on. But it's your Lordship, no, we don't. I do want to give Mr. Labuskaghni some time. On 1096, I mean, Mr. Bishop, it draws my attention to 1096.
Of what?
Of the main case. Yes, but I mean, sorry, something I hadn't picked up in the middle of the night, but I do need to read the one sentence.
So it's 1096?
1096. It's the charade. It's the charade of it. But in a different
It seems
guise.
to me we are seesawing between different points.
Yeah.
I thought
No,
we
no,
dealt with the
yes, my
charade.
lord. I was dealing with paragraph 1 of the main case's notice of motion. I flipped through to certain arguments that I want to put to bed in respect of our learned friends, Mr. Motsoneng's heads of argument. And Mr. Bishop took me out of my stride and he asked me to read this paragraph while we were debating this other issue. I'll come back to our learned friends' heads of argument and complete the argument with reference to both sets of relief. On page 1096, there's a letter from Mr. Aguma to Mr. Motsoneng. On the 22nd of September, and we know this is a week after the 14th of September when it was finally determined that Mr. Motsoneng would not be the COO. Are you with me, my lords? They say, following the judgment of the SCA to nullify your permanent appointment to the position of COO, the SABC executive directors, who are they? Who were there on the 22nd of September? The Lordship will ask the question.
Well, it seems to me you're asking the question, and it seems to me the answer is Mr. Aguma and Mr. Guana.
Is it Mr. Aguma and?
Maybe, yes.
Yes.
Mr. Aguma.
One of the four. One of my 4 targets when it comes to costs. Remember those 4 horsemen up there? One's a woman. Next sentence. You will retain the same remuneration packet that you had when you served as the COO. And the term of your new employment contract is 5 years. So my telecom suggestion, my lords, there it is. Your new term of employment, your new contract of employment, which is the date the SABC received the SCA judgment. We've got telecom written all over this. And to suggest that he would go back into the position he was in before is put to rest by Mr. Aguma's own words. New contract of employment starting now with your old salary of the CEO. And if this is not a charade, if this is not Mr. Motsoneng talking through Mr. Aguma, then I don't know what is. With respect. I sound like a stuck record, but I've been like this for 2.5 years in this group, and the SCA.
What did strike me as peculiar about the chronology in late December is that...
Late December?
Late September of this year. I think on the 19th of September, there's this round robin resolution that that they will recommend to the minister that Mr. Motsoneng be appointed as the acting COO.
Yes.
Then it seems to me on the 21st of September they were busy motivating to the portfolio committee why he should be appointed to the corporate affairs position. The 22nd of September, he's written this letter that he's been appointed to that, but the minister only declines the recommendation to appoint him as the acting COO on the 26th of September. Unless he was going to be corporate affairs permanently and only an acting COO.
Oh,
that might have been.
With respect to your lordships, when one, in life, one learns that when you tell a lie, you've got to be careful that the lie must be consistent. What's happened here is that the whole bang shoot of what's going on is a complete lie. And when one does that, it's so difficult to be consistent. And that's what's happened here. It's not just about a day here or a day there. The entire bang shoot doesn't make... You talk about Alice in Wonderland. Your Lordship has got the point. So I want to turn back. I have to turn back to Mr. Motsoneng's heads of argument. And one deals with difficulties that are confronted. Perhaps I just take the court to the contents page. Maybe to be quicker, because I do want to give, and I've said it before, Mr. Labuskaghni as much time as I can. If one sees the contents page, there's I'll just start on the content and go as quickly as I can. On page 3, there's a heading called "The application should be struck from the roll." And the reason for that, they say, are a number of files the DA had unilaterally chosen when to set the matter down, blah, 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 there was no service, etc. And it's not urgent, Mr. Motsoeneng can continue in this executive position, and there's this whole interesting urgency debate. Now, I know Mr. Bester and his colleague weren't here in the previous rounds, but the argument's been made before on a number of occasions and been rejected before every single time. And perhaps I should just turn to the judgment of Skippers to see what he actually said about this argument. And what he said was, it's argued that there's no urgency and the matter should be struck from the roll. He explained in some detail why it was urgent, the public broadcaster, etc. And he explained how the matter had been set down. And then at the end, he says, for all of these reasons, it's appropriately before me, the papers are before me, the heads of argument are before me, etc., etc. And it's, look at this. What does he want? Does he want to postpone this matter? Struck from the roll. That's what Mr. Motsoeneng wants. That's what he did before Skippers J 2.5 years ago. And said, we're not going to have any of this. You here, you filed your papers, you filed your heads of argument, let's get on with it. On the case of the Cameron J.A. judgment in Hawker. But in any event, it's urgent. We don't get to listen to what is in the public interest. We know the different cases. So that whole paragraph of lack of urgency, lack of service, has been, not the lack of service, because that's slightly different, but it's been run before and rejected. As far as service is concerned, there Mr. Motsoeneng sits. He sits in this court with 2 counsel, attorneys, etc. He's filed affidavits in both matters, heads of argument, both men. He said, whoa, I wasn't served properly, you can't hear the matter. This court won't have any tolerance of that type of argument, with respect.
Yeah, but their complaint is as a result of the truncated times. They couldn't prepare properly.
Where's the application for postponement, Justice Lagrange? Where is it? I haven't seen it. Let me deal with it. It's here, we're ready. Where's his review of the JP's allocation to your lawyer, or the DJP's allocation to your lordship's directive, where Mr. Fergus turned up in court on behalf of Mr. Motsoeneng, and he's seemingly, I wasn't there, seemingly agreed to this timetable. Where's the review of that? Where's the complaint?
No, he wasn't. He was just... He didn't agree to it, he was just sitting there.
No, but he knew about it.
He knew about it, that's for sure.
He knew about it. That's good enough for me.
He never had any instructions, although...
What was he doing? He was there on day one. And I explained to him which counsel were there from day one. He was one of those for day one. This is the first appearance that I've had.
Isn't it better let us wait to see whether there's anything that Mr. Motsoeneng's counsel says he would have wanted to say if he had had more time?
As a precedent. Maybe you could say that which the purported amicus wanted to say. Then the next heading is the application is premature because the ad hoc committee's inquiry. The argument was run before Skippers J that the DA have come too early because of the parliamentary process that could happen. Section 15 was run and rejected by Skippers J, upheld by the SCA. It's not open to parties to come to court, make arguments, they get rejected by the highest courts of the land, and then a year later they come and make the same argument or similar type of argument. It's not open to them. And your lordship again will show no tolerance of that type of argument. Then page 15, and I'm not going to, because we haven't got time, I'm not going to the detail. On page 15, the DA is in any way not entitled to the relief sought. I'll come to that. His right to fair labour practices. What labour? He had no labour rights on the 14th or 22nd of September, depending on this Alice in Wonderland timetable that you look at. On their own version, they gave him a new contract. They can't give a man a new contract who already has labour rights. With respect. Then they said the limitation of rights, the DA misconstrues the consequence of the public protector's findings. The application to stay has been dealt with, rejected, and there we see it again. No tolerance reason. The application to strike out, and we've made submissions on that, and we don't want to take it any further. So may I take, in conclusion, the 2 sets of relief and marry them in this way. In the disciplinary proceeding notice of motion, paragraph 1 2, 3, 4, and 5, it seems to us follow like night follows day. As far as 6 to 10 are concerned, well, 6 to 9 are concerned.
Sorry, which ones follow as night follows day?
1 to 5. From 6 to 9, we submit will depend on what you find in the what I call the main case. Because if you find in the main case, for example, that prayer 1 is appropriate, then obviously 6 to 9 should perhaps be held over until such time as the review in the Gauteng High Court is final, one way or the other. Because what 6 to 9 does, or 6 to 9 do, are to require another disciplinary inquiry. And obviously, it would seem strange that were this court to find that Mr. Motseneng is not entitled to employment for all the reasons, the charade, the bad faith, this letter that I pointed out in 1096, then 6 to 9 should be held over until a later stage, if ever Mr. Motseneng in the future becomes an employee of the SABC.
Mr. Katz, I understand that going back to the skipper's order, there was the 60-day time limit for a disciplinary inquiry, and subject to what you've just said, I think that's perpetuated by you in your notice of motion.
That's right.
Isn't it potentially part of the problem? On the one hand, one must have something that's wrapped up within 60 days, and on the other side, one has a complaint that it wasn't dealt with fully enough and people weren't summoned to give evidence. Is it not more critical, if the previous process is set aside, that one should have credible, independent prosecutors and a disciplinary chair which will ensure that the process is conducted properly without necessarily putting it within a straitjacket of a time limit?
Yes, I would accept that.
Because they will
I accept that. But that goes back to the Public Protector's report, rather than...
Did she herself set a 60-day time limit?
Skipper's Jake mirrored her order, her remedial action. But that's not the problem here, for why I'm debating the 6 to 9. Were the court to... Let's go to the Telkom example. Let's say Motseneng works at Telkom in an executive position, not a board member, but an executive position. And the Public Protector does a remedial action number in respect of his bad work at Telkom. He's bribing Apple, he's bribing Dell, or whatever it is, Samsung, or they bribing him, or whatever. And she files a report about that. And she says to Telkom, you, Telkom, have a disciplinary inquiry against Mr. Motseneng. A month later, Mr. Motseneng then goes off to the SABC on a statutory appointment by the statutorily appointed body. It would seem odd to us that Telkom should nevertheless hold a disciplinary inquiry against a former employees of theirs. So we would submit that we're in a similar position as far as 6 to 9 is concerned, if your Lordship were with us in the main cases, at least as far as Brev 1 is concerned. So that's why we say 6 to 9 are dependent upon how the court structures the relief in the main case. And then, of course, 10 becomes irrelevant because this was before the SCA's prayer 10 was asked for before the 14th of September 2016. Now it's become redundant. Prayer 11 is of some moment from day one. We've asked that not only our costs be paid jointly and severally by any respondent opposing, but we ask personally. And the question arises, and your Lordships will have to decide in this way, were your Lordships to come to our assistance in any way, and it seems to us that you have to, bearing in mind the concessions made, and all the respondents accept that at least some of 1 to 5 must be given. In that instance, well, what type of cost order? Now, your Lordships have heard that in this matter, the disciplinary matter, I appear with Ms. Blizzard. There were costs incurred. I speak under correction. I can't remember what's... Samela J did dismiss the stay application with costs. But there have been costs incurred in respect of the disciplinary case separately and distinct from the main case. And now the question arises, who should pay those costs in respect of the disciplinary? And your Lordship will recall our four horsemen, Motsoeneng, Aguma, the Minister, and the Professor. It seems to us that there's no reason why, at least in respect of the disciplinary inquiry, bearing in mind the nature of the evidence, those four individual named people, named horse people, should be not held jointly and severally responsible personally for the DA's costs. And we refer to your Lordship, Justice Rogers' judgment in the Oudtshoorn municipality case, where your Lordship made the point that where you have a ratepayer or a councillor squabble, why should the ratepayers pay for that squabble? Why should the taxpayer pay for this clearly unlawful conduct, which is like a stuck record in the wheels of this court? We've warned them, we've told them that we're going to do it, we've done it, and there's no answer other than don't make me pay costs. I did it on advice. Where's the advice? The Alice in Wonderland. So that's how we would suggest the disciplinary application be dealt with. I want to turn back to the main application and push through to the other.
Sorry, if I can just go back. The prayer for costs is that it shall be paid personally by any respondent opposing.
That's right.
Now, Mr. Aguma isn't cited as a party and isn't and wasn't the chairperson of the board. Is there any notice of opposition from Mr. Aguma?
At the time, Mr. Jimmy Matthews was. Your Lordship will recall the evidence.
I know the circumstances, but just procedurally, apart from anything else, is Mr. Aguma warned by way of this application that you will ask for costs against him personally?
To the extent that your Lordship comes to the conclusion that he wasn't so warned.
Well, I'm just asking, was he?
Well, my Lord, he certainly was warned that shall be paid by joint and personally by any respondent. Well,
but is he a respondent? That's the question.
I take the point. Well, your Lordship will recall, I know your Lordships didn't. What he says to this court in paragraph 3, and I made the point earlier, and your Lordships, I made it. And
what he might have said or not, but
who's he acting on behalf of? Page 586. Page 586, paragraph 3. The Lordship will consider this issue with regard to paragraph. He says, this is what he says. I'm duly authorised to propose to this affidavit on behalf of, etc. I shall refer to them collectively as the SABC. Well, when you start doing things like that, be warned. Pass on.
And you're saying the SABC is a party before this court?
Where's his quorum? Where's his? I'm duly authorised to oppose this on behalf of the SABC. With which authority? Which quorum? Which 9 people?
Well, is it not conceivable that a CEO may have an existing valid delegated authority?
Tell us, my Lord.
Well, is it open to you if you say that the SABC has not properly instructed attorneys? Do you not use the provisions of Rule 7?
Rule 7. We thought about Rule 7.
Well, then the attorneys acting for the SABC would have needed to provide proof of the authority, and they might either have done that by a board resolution, which you would have then attacked as not being quorate, or they might have relied on delegated authority. But it wasn't done.
No.
I myself have, on several occasions, given judgments to unmeritorious respondents who try and argue that something wasn't authorised, and they don't follow Rule 7.
This is dated the 14th of November.
What is?
The paragraph 3 on page 586.
Yeah.
The affidavit by Mr. Aguma was dated 14 November 2016. That your Lordship will find from 595. It's a common cause. And I take your Lordship's point that there might be a general delegation for a certain purpose. I take your Lordship's point. But bearing in mind the big picture, the context of what we're dealing with here, when it has become common cause that on that date the board was incorrect, your Lordship can draw the conclusion that. But anyway,
the function of that late affidavit was not to advance opposition, but to explain why the SABC was now abiding the disciplinary review.
My Lord, let me just
That is correct.
So I don't think he filed an affidavit in the disciplinary case purporting to represent the SABC as an opponent of the...
No, I take your Lordship's point. Yes, my Lord, I see that in paragraph 5, your Lordship makes that point in paragraph 5. I mean, the point that your Lordship puts to me is made by Mr. Gloom in paragraph 5. But whatever,
can I ask technically, what was... Did Mr. Motsoeneng, is his full-on opposition in the disciplinary case?
He abided. He said he was subject to it. He can't be responsible.
Well, no, he filed quite a long affidavit.
Yes, he did. He said all that. But as your Lordship knows, it was a charade. That's
No,
why I say to your Lordships, at the outset, your Lordship will have to decide. Was this a game? Was it serious? So if Mr. Motsoeneng was Jim, whoa, I was subject to disciplinary procedure, and they messed it up. I got the benefit of it, so be it.
But did he file, I'm just trying to work out, did he file, he filed an affidavit in which he certainly put up a lot of facts.
Yes.
And he certainly concludes by saying that it would be very unfair to suspend me, so presumably he's resisting at least that part. But I was just trying to work out, did he file, what sort of notice did he file in response to the application?
It was a notice of opposition. The affidavit of Lordship...
Was it opposition or to abide?
So 132, the affidavit. And he says...
His notice of opposition is on page 500. I'm not sure if it's been withdrawn.
Yes. My Lord, I haven't seen a notice of withdrawal. But on 134, and Lordship recall, it boggles the brain. Parties are entitled to take every technical point that they can take, good or bad, and there's no such thing as a technical point. But when they take a Rule 30 point of the kind that was taken, on page 134, your Lordship has to take the view that they're taking points which are conceivable and inconceivable. It's inconceivable that before whoever the judge was going to be in this case, at that time, they could take a Rule 30 point. And your Lordship, when your Lordship has regard to this point that I'm making now, your Lordship will have regard to a case that our learned friends from Mr. Motsoeneng cited called Republicains and Pets. I know that your Lordships are aware of the judgment of the AD, in which what the DA did is what the appellate division tell them to do, and then Mr. Motsoeneng says, no, that's an irregular step under Rule 30. Not acceptable. Your Lordship won't, and it's part of a basket. It's not just the fact that he filed a Rule 30 on perhaps strange or wrong advice. The DA does what the law tells it to do, and then they say, well, you've done it irregularly. Your Lordship, that's not acceptable. I want to turn back to paragraph 2 of...
We would also like to give Mr. Labuschagne...
okay. Well, my Lord, we rest with suggesting that 2 to 5 of the main case also follow like night follows day. Paragraph 6, again, it's a question of costs. It's a question of the scale and from whom, and whether it be particular individuals or particular bodies. Let me just add something, and then your Lordships will think about it and decide. When it comes to costs, it's not only the DA's costs that should be paid for by the individuals, not by the state. But it's also those state entities that should be paid. They shouldn't be responsible. So why should the SABC have to brief Mr. Du Toit and his team? Professor, Mr. Motsoeneng, they must pay Mr. Du Toit's costs, etc. Why should we, the taxpayer, again be mulcted with costs for the stuck record that we are sitting here dealing on a day-to-day basis? As it pleases.
Thank you. Mr. Labuschagne.
As the court pleases, my lords, the interest of the public sector in these proceedings relates to the enforcement of remedial action taken with the report, as far as the SABC and Mr. Motsoeneng is concerned. Our submission is that the finally determined by the judgment of the EFF, the Nkandla judgment that is referred to. And the position of the remedial action is therefore that it will stand unless set aside by a court. Although the position of the public protector in these proceedings is that neither the SABC nor the minister have complied.
That's now the current public protector.
The current public protector, the office still says so. There is no compliance by the minister with the remedial action directed against her. The SABC has filed an implementation report which is not a compliance report. It is in fact an opposition report. It's more like heads of argument as to why they would not be compliant. So the position overall is that the remedial action that was taken by the public protector in respect of both the SABC and the minister are much broader than just Mr. Motsoeneng. And for that reason, our submission to start off with is that the remedial action taken, the starting point is its binding. And our submission is that the question from the public protector's perspective in these proceedings is what are the implications of non-compliance in this case? Does that justify the relief? And from that vantage point, Lord, we just wish to refer to another...
So, sorry, to understand your argument correctly, so the premises that you're moving from is that neither the SABC nor the minister has complied with the public protector's remedial action.
That is her position under oath. That is the position in fact. There will not be any meaningful dispute on that issue. As far as, and the question is really, what is the consequence? What is the consequence in law as far as these, the SABC, its board, the minister is concerned for not having complied? And for purposes of this debate, it might be necessary just to distinguish between the SABC on the one hand and the minister. The SABC has sought to review the report of the public protector. The minister hasn't. But we do know that our suspicion is that as far as the enforceability of the remedial action is concerned, it is not impacted by the pending review application of the SABC. The reasons are twofold. Firstly, that Rule 4911 doesn't apply anymore, with the effect that unless a court suspends the report of the public protector, it is binding and needs to be, the remedial action needs to be complied with.
And we know in this case that was not the situation.
That is not the case. And from that vantage point, what is the consequence? We submit that to be a basis on which your lordships could adjudicate these two applications before you. Our submission is that even where the review is pending, that doesn't mean the SABC can ignore compliance. They have not sought to suspend that report pending review. They have to comply. They might do so under protest without walking into a preemption argument, but they cannot ignore it. And they certainly cannot put up a report saying why they're not going to comply. Our submission is therefore, Lord, that this is a more fundamental question and it's broader than just the debate as far as Mr. Motsoeneng is concerned. And as far as the implications are, there are a few, one can look at the relief in the two applications to see what would the upshot be. Would there be a basis for the declaratives of unconstitutional conduct? Our submission is, Lords, that the obligation on the SABC and the minister as organs of state is, under section 1813, is to, by various means, to ensure the efficacy of the office of the public protector. And if they have not done so, they've acted unconstitutionally. So we submit that declaratives flow from the position they've taken and are therefore justified. Speaking firstly about the review of the disciplinary. My Lords, the Public Protector has, in the answering papers in that application, expressed her view that the SABC has essentially sabotaged that disciplinary process by either not permitting the prosecutor sufficient time or not arranging necessary witnesses, not leading witnesses on some of the charges, or letting down of the charges for various reasons. It is...
Can I just ask, I understand the Public Protector's primary point, first point, to be that the merits weren't up for grabs at all.
No, my Lord, that's actually something I want to get to right now. There seems to be this misapprehension that the Public Protector, as far as that issue is concerned, has the same view as the VA. It does not. The consequence will be no different, however, if I could explain what I mean. The Public Protector is subject to the Constitution and the law. And the Lords, where the Public Protector directs that appropriate disciplinary steps need to be taken as far as Mr. Motswaneng is concerned, that does not mean that unconstitutional conduct would be sanctioned because it's the Public Protector issuing the remedial action. The starting point, however, is that her remedial action, her findings are binding, and that has an impact on how those proceedings, how those findings need to be dealt with in the disciplinary inquiry.
So if I understand your submission properly, is that if there was supposed to be a disciplinary inquiry, it could only have dealt with the sanction, the issue of sanction.
We submit that it would be a proper disciplinary inquiry on all issues within which cognizance had to be taken in full of the findings and the remedial actions directed.
But what does that mean?
It means that, my Lord, that if Mr. Edlund assesses the evidence before him, he needs to take into account the fact that there is a finding of dishonesty against Mr. Motswaneng by the Public Protector based on interviews and the record and admissions by him and an expression of regret that he had filled in his application form in 1995 indicating that he had passed matric and he had made up subjects and grades for them, which was repeated in 2003. Now, if that is a finding that the Public Protector has made, Mr. Edlund cannot, in assessing the evidence before him, disregard such a finding. It has to be put into the pot and taken into consideration, because we submit. If he ignores it and does not take it into account, his decision doesn't meet the rationality test.
But are you saying that the that the disciplinary inquiry could take it into the account of saying, well, we've read what the Public Protector said and we've listened to all the evidence in this case and we think the Public Protector's finding was wrong? Mr. Motswaneng didn't misrepresent to anybody or nobody was misled. Would it be open to the disciplinary inquiry to come to that view? So are you saying that the Public Protector's report merely needs to be taken into account in the sense that inter alia, the correctness of the things that she decided must be properly investigated?
We are submitting her finding as such is something to be taken into account.
But in the sense that I've just put it to you, the disciplinary chairperson does not at the end of the inquiry have to agree with the Public Protector's findings.
He is not
factual findings
bound to give effect to that finding.
No, but I'm asking you a simple question. Yes. Is it open to the chair of the disciplinary inquiry at the end to reach a factual finding at odds with the Public Protector's finding provided he or she has inter alia had regard to her report.
That is what we submit is possible.
So
it needs to be taken into account. If not, the decisions in the disciplinary inquiry do not comply with the consequences of a finding of the public protector and will not meet a rationality test.
So on that argument, Mr. Motsoeneng can, for instance, regarding the matric certificate issue, let evidence to rebut all of what the public protector might have come to a conclusion to.
My Lord, with respect, that is an issue which has been decided by the SCA. The SCA said in paragraph 50 of their judgment that his evidence that there were people aware of the fact that he did not have a matric certificate is merely indicative that there were people conniving with him. And the fact that he shows no remorse worsens the position. And if that is what the SCA has found, it's binding.
Why should it? The SCA was merely wasn't the SCA ultimately upholding a decision that Mr. Motsoeneng should now be subjected to the disciplinary inquiry?
That is so.
So the status of what the disciplinary inquiry could find was as much open after the SCA's judgment as before. The SCA judge wasn't purporting to decide the issues. It might, for purposes of the decision it reached and exercising its powers, have worked on that basis. But it doesn't become res judicata in the disciplinary inquiry.
Lords, I'm merely referring to this paragraph where the SCA expressed itself quite strongly. If it is obiter, then it might be distinguished at the disciplinary committee. But what I'm saying is that the SCA, whose judgment is not challenged, regarded the collaboration of people in the misrepresentation made to the SABC as an aggravating factor.
Well,
but that's a different issue. I do take the point. What we are saying, my Lord, is that the rationality test needs to be met in taking into account the findings of the public protector. And if they are not taken into account, the question is whether the decision was a proper exercise of the discretion in the disciplinary committee hearing.
You see, I'd rather understood from the public protector's affidavits in the disciplinary review and in the latest review that she said it was not possible for the disciplinary inquiry to, as it were, conduct a parallel fact-finding exercise.
Well, no. The position taken was that a parallel fact-finding exercise cannot be taken for purposes of second-guessing conclusions.
Well, what's the difference between second-guessing them and disagreeing with them?
The purpose should be to decide whether to challenge her report or not. But absent a challenge, there has to be compliance.
I understand that insofar as complying with the remedial action is concerned, but the remedial action is that not that Mr. Motsoeneng must be dismissed, but that he must be subjected to a disciplinary inquiry. And you say for purposes of the disciplinary inquiry, her report should not be interpreted as finally concluding the factual misconduct which she says must be the subject of that inquiry. So in that sense, the disciplinary chairperson can second guess or disagree with the public protector's findings based on all the evidence before him.
That is so. The rationality test merely indicates that he has to think about it. And that test is measured if the findings have met with the requirements of the Constitution. The alternative, we submit, might result in unconstitutional conduct where the rights to a fair process are denied. Someone subject to a disciplinary process. The Lords, if I could just indicate where the basis for this submission is. It's in the papers at page 981, where the public protector says at paragraph 12, as far as findings are concerned, the position is the same as with remedial action. They stand unless and until reviewed and set aside. If left unchallenged, findings must be specifically recognized and taken into account in all relevant circumstances arising in the future. She then proceeds to say that the board who appointed Mr. Motsoeneng whoever appointed him to the group executive corporate affairs position has to take it into account, for example. But this would be the same submission we make. We submit that such an approach would meet with the constitutional requirements of fair process, and it would also provide the status that the Constitution envisages for the remedial action taken by the public protector. Applied to the facts of this matter, my Lords, I have to say two things. And the first is that the SABC and the Minister seem to have conceded or abided the setting aside of the disciplinary committee on a ground which appears to be on a position which they say the public protector has taken. We point out that's not the position she has taken, but the position she does take will have the same result, that the DC's decision would be irrational. But our submission is that insofar as the Minister and the SABC are making a concession on the basis that the public protector has taken a view as to the binding nature in the disciplinary of her remedial action, then that would not be correct. Our submission is that that just becomes a hook on which to set aside her review of her report, and it's not the case.
So, on the limited amount we know of the Gauteng review, the SABC is acting now on a misconception as to the public protector's view of the report, because they appear to be acting now or bringing the Gauteng review on the footing that the factual findings cannot be challenged in any way, even by the disciplinary inquiry, and that all that the disciplinary inquiry needed to be concerned with was sanction. That's, of course, that they say now they realize that the first disciplinary inquiry was misconceived because the merits were up for grabs. Now that it knows that it's not the case, it needs to review the report. Now you tell us, and I'm not suggesting the public protector has necessarily said anything to support the view that the SABC now takes of it, but the practical effect is that the SABC is going to court in Gauteng on a view of the report which the public protector herself doesn't endorse.
That is so. If that is the basis, but also I might just indicate I've received an instruction. The public protector does oppose that review application. The position in that application is that the record has been finalized and that the SABC are late in supplementing their founding papers. So whatever their grounds are, we will see them once the supplementary papers have been filed. But we do submit, my Lord, that we do not wish to be seen to be part of a process where the SABC and the Minister are abiding the setting aside of a disciplinary committee on a position they think the public protector has adopted. I've corrected that.
Okay. Thank you for that, Mr. Rabeskagni.
Lords, you might recall the Simelane matter where the Constitutional Court found that in appointing Mr. Simelane to his position, it was irrational not to take into account a finding by the Ginwala Commission about Mr. Simelane, an adverse finding. As a rationality test, that would be a parallel application of what we are submitting in this particular instance.
Yes, I think in those circumstances, in that case, it would have been accepted that a credible process to show that Ms. Ginwala's findings about Simelane were wrong could have been conducted, and he could then have been appointed. Her findings weren't binding, but they could not be disregarded.
That is the point we're taking. They have to have an effect, and the effect is that they have to be considered and applied, either accepted or distinguished based on evidence which is before that tribunal. But there has to be a rational process in dealing with that finding. Absent that, there is no. So, Lord, I see the Minister has made the concession and not the SABC that I've been referring to. My Lords, I do not intend going through the heads as such. I would like to move straight on to the relief to see what the implications are of the approach that we have taken. Our submission is that goes to the notice of motion in case 3104 of 16. then the declarator in paragraph 1 would, in our submission, be consistent with the Public Protector's position on enforcement of remedial action. As far as paragraph 2 is concerned, that is an issue of contempt. That's not the issue on which we express a view. As far as the remainder is concerned, the interference by the Minister, prayer 3, that's a factual issue for this court to consider. But as far as prayer 4 is concerned, the setting aside of the disciplinary proceedings as prayer 4 and prayer 5, that those proceedings should be set aside on the grounds that I have advanced. If there should be a new disciplinary process, that's an issue which we leave in the hands of the court.
Can I just raise what I raised with Mr. Katz about timelines for that? It does seem that in the event the SABC got perilously close to the expiry of the 60 days, and that one doesn't adopt too sinister a view of its conduct, have partially explained why such a rushed and apparently inadequate job was done at the disciplinary inquiry. Do you say 60 days should suffice for it to be finalised?
But had there not been all these challenges, the court proceedings, etc., then our submission is that the 60-day period is nothing inherently unfair. It might be difficult going into a festive season regarding availability of witnesses, etc. That's not a factor that played a role in this particular matter. But we submit 60 days is not an unduly short period. The question might arise, what is the effect of the fact that the 60 days is part of the remedial action? And as an issue before this court will take it into account and determine whether it is appropriate or not and whatever relief flows from it.
Does the Public Protectors Act contain provisions for the Public Protector herself to extend deadlines that she has laid down?
Yes, that is so.
So the proper approach would then be for the chairperson of the disciplinary inquiry or the pro forma prosecutor to ask for additional time from the Public Protector.
That might be an approach. Yeah. If there were such approaches, that would be what one would expect regarding the implementation of the reports. That's the type of thing one would negotiate or interact with the Public Protector to indicate that there's problems in meeting timelines and asking for extensions. But that type of interaction was happening.
For as long as the board remains in porridge, it won't be able to appoint a disciplinary chair.
That seems to be a difficulty. It's an issue which the National Assembly will have to address, but it is a difficulty.
Would you accept that if we were with the applicant on the primary relief in the disciplinary case, that it would be undesirable to direct the new disciplinary inquiry to take place prior to the determination of the review? Do you think they should be coupled or uncoupled?
If the implication would be that this disciplinary could be dragged on by the dominus litis in the review, then that would be undesirable. If that review could be expedited or any relief granted by this court be coupled to a request to the DJP and the Gauteng division to expedite the matter, and giving leave to the parties to approach the DJP on that basis, that might cover that concern.
Yes, I'm not sure we can do anything in relation to the Gauteng court.
That's where the review is taking place.
Yes, but we can't make any requests, I don't think.
A request can be made, not an order.
Yeah. I think that falls within the domain of the JP and DJP of Gauteng.
That might just be something that can be dealt with administratively and not in a court process. But that would be the concern. That if disciplinary, if it were to be held over pending that review, the implications could be that it is on hold indefinitely as long as the SABC is in control of that process. The fear is that Mr. Motswaneng, despite various orders declaring the fact that he's not fit for various positions, is still in the office. has not been removed, and there are various court orders indicating his unsuitability for many of the positions that he has had. But also, as far as the relief is concerned, in what has been called the main application,
can I just refer to paragraph 39 of the affidavit of the current public protector? Is that a view that page 991 of the record, paragraph 991, paragraph 39?
What the public protector here says, it must be interpreted, and she says what the lordship seems to read into it. But it would be, we say, consistent. She says that he would, I'm advised and submit that the appointment of Mr. Motswaneng in any position at the SABC, particularly a position of authority and leadership, would be improper until such time as the SABC's application for a review has been finalized. Well, what she is indicating here is that she has found him to be a dishonest employee. An employee who has caused a toxic failure of corporate governance within the SABC. And for that reason, we submit, and that is also something the SCA referred to, these failures in corporate governance are linked to the position and the influence that he has had over a number of years on the board and on purging of staff, etc. And for that reason, a position of influence, where honesty and integrity are required, we submit would not be consistent with the findings of the public protector. And unless those findings are suspended, pending the review, this would be the consequence of those findings. It's consistent with the approach that we have advanced. Because I'm just looking for the notice of motion in the application. There are declaratives which are sought as far as...
Is that in case number 3104? Or
No, I've just gone through 3104. In 18107, there are only declaratives that are sought. And prayer 1 there is consistent with the point we've just discussed.
Prayer 2 point.
Not hold any position, at all, needs to be qualified as my submission.
Yes.
Positions of authority where honesty and integrity are requirements.
Can you name me a position where honesty and integrity is not required?
Exactly. There are very few such positions, my Lord. The implications might be that the relief as formulated will be the only consequence. As far as 2.1 is concerned, this is a factual issue. The question will be whether the board played a role or whether the appointment was made by the GCEO. That's an issue for the court to decide. We will not make some questions on that. As far as paragraph 3.1 is concerned, the board is important in that we submit is established, although that's not a position that the public protector necessarily takes. We submit it's a matter of law. And prayer 4 is a repeat of the relief in the other application, a failure to meet constitutional obligations. Prayer 5, we submit, is established on the facts that the board is in court. As far as the costs are concerned, those are issues we leave for the court to decide. But unless there's something specific, this is the thrust of the approach taken by the public protector in these proceedings. We might just mention, my lords, that when last we rose to address the court on case 3104, the proceedings were derailed by an application for a stay. We submit that we have the substantial fear that Mr. Bester is about to repeat that process and ask for a stay of proceedings. If that is so, Lord, we have heads of argument where we will be opposing that approach on the basis that it would render ineffective the remedial action taken by the public, that would undermine the efficacy of her office, and that we've set out further grounds. The SABC failed, and Mr. Motswaneng is one step removed from that. He's not even a party to the review, which he seeks to be the review which is the end remedy for the interim relief that he seeks now, suspending this application. So we will make submissions in due course if the need arises. I just wish to indicate we do have heads to propose such a stay application, as the court pleases.
Thank you. It's been quite a long session up until now. I think it's advisable that we take the lunch break and resume as soon as possible after 2 o'clock. Would that suit counsel? Court will adjourn for the lunch hour.